Chapter 16-17. The arrow was so long that it exceeded the general concept of an arrow. Normally, only a ballista could control such a long and huge arrow. Sylvanas had a good idea. She skillfully performed the golden rooster standing on one leg, stretching out her slender legs to hold the arm guard of Solidar's Wrath of the Stars. Due to the maximum strength, the streamlined muscles on her arms bulged slightly, and she pulled the bowstring. It was just a low shout, but it sounded like a spring thunder. Thousands of lightning shadows were triggered, and the next moment, the entire greenhouse of life was filled with the buzzing sound of thunder and lightning. Freya was stunned for a moment, and found that she seemed to have been struck by thousands of lightning bolts. This was an illusion brought about by the trance. Her senses had been completely blinded, and she did not notice that an illusory lightning pattern extended from the front of Sylvanas' bow to her forehead. Two very strange sounds. It was Freya's scream of being hit by the arrow, followed by the sound of the wind and thunder arrow breaking through the wind. Even Sylvanas herself did not know if the arrow just now exceeded the speed of sound. She only knew that she had hit the target. She had shot her target perfectly. The sharp arrowhead pierced the Titan Guardian's brow, and most of the thunder arrow was deeply embedded in the forehead. From the beginning to the end, Sylvanas had never thought of killing Freya completely. He had to deal enough damage to wake the other party up, but at the same time, he couldn't be too heavy-handed and kill the other party directly. This was a skill. Especially in a situation where Sylvanas didn't have any kind of blunt weapon to attack. Now it seemed that the effect was good. The thunder arrow acted as a lightning rod. Queen Sylvanas' fingers were connected to the void, and she focused more on transferring the power of thunder from the wind elemental realm into Freya's brow. What the hell am I doing? Yogg-Saron. Master. No, you're a prisoner. Get out of my head. No. Master, I didn't mean to blaspheme your name. Wah. Not only did Freya cover her head in pain, but she also tried to pluck Queen Sylvanas' tiny thunder arrow from her forehead. How could this be? Queen Sylvanas was also angry. She continued to raise her left hand high, and her 5 jade-like fingers continued to guide the lightning into Freya's head. Her right hand took out a lightning whip from thin air and lashed it at Freya again and again. Queen Sylvie, who was wearing boots, seemed to be the embodiment of lightning. Every move she made was surrounded by lightning. Stupid guardian. Wake up right now. This scene was very strange. A tiny elf had whipped a 10-story tall female giant, causing her to roll on the ground, crushing the trees and charred wood that had stopped growing around her into smithereens. If Duque had the time to see this scene, he might be worried that Queen Sylvanas had awakened some strange attribute. Unfortunately, Duque was not free. In fact, after Queen Shi, Onyxia, and Vashj left, he became busy. Very simply, General Vezix was coming from the stairway of madness. As one of the best among the faceless, as the most loyal henchman of the ancient god Yogg-Saron, Vezix was clearly aware of the consequences of letting Duque and his group attack those unreliable guardians. He chose to take the initiative. In Duque's original plan, Archivon's 4 guardians would join forces to hold off Vezix. If possible, it would be a stalemate. They would drag Vezix until Duque defeated the remaining 3 guardians, and then gather all the strong to kill Yogg-Saron. There were 2 keys to this plan. First, General Vezix could not die. If he died early, just as Loken's death would attract the observer Orgaren, his death would definitely stimulate Yogg-Saron's early recovery. Being backstabbed by an ancient god before he could deal with the 3 guardians would really be the end of the game amidst the laughter and chatter. The second key was that Vezix could not interfere with their work of waking up the 3 guardians. What annoyed Duque was that something went wrong on the second point. Less than a minute after the 3 women left, General Vezix gave Duque a big fright. This huge humanoid monster draped in a crab shell did not come from the entrance of the Stairway of Madness to the Guardian's temple area. Instead, it came with heavenly evil. Without any warning, the roof of the temple above Flame Watcher Corellon suddenly shattered. The general fell at a terrifying speed far beyond a freefall. The speed of an ICBM was not something a giant like Corellon could react to. Duque made a counterattack. It was the Titan lightning magic he had just gotten from Tarim. This was the fastest magic Duque could release. However, as soon as the magic was released, Duque felt something was wrong. The elements around the general seemed to be forcibly pushed away. Even with Duque's demigod lightning magic, he felt sluggish, like a sharp knife stabbing into a paste. Duque's lightning still hit General Vezix, but the other party took it head-on. The general swung a house-sized, hammer-like pincer and smashed it on Corellon's head before he could raise his arms to form a defense. Ah! The Flame Watcher let out a furious howl. If he was a pure fire elemental creature, he could have laughed 3 times like Ragnaros and said, "Hit me all you want. I lose if I cry out in pain." Unfortunately, Corellon was a guardian giant, a special existence between a creature and an elemental creature. So even if Corellon tilted his head at the last moment, his entire right shoulder was still caved in. He was severely injured on the spot and could not get up. Facing the siege of the other 3 Titan Guardians, General Wiseax suddenly waved his huge arm, and a 100-meter-tall shadow elemental tide appeared behind him. With an extremely gorgeous cleave, he forcibly broke through the siege of the 3 Guardians and let out a burst of wild laughter. Ha ha ha! This is the territory of Master Yogg-Saron. Invaders! Suffer! Despair! Kneel before the great power of the Master. Vezix must have been injected with some kind of expired drug. Although he was behaving abnormally, no one knew how long his madness would last. Duke's face twitched as he clearly felt the dark energy that was centered around the general rejecting the entry of the 4 main elements. Of course, he knew that the general had a despair aura that could forcefully reduce the attack speed of all enemies in the field, as well as reduce mana regeneration throughout the entire process. But it was definitely not this powerful. This thing could almost be called a despair territory. Chapter 1618. Did Tarim not fall for the trap and get brainwashed? Was it Loken's earlier failure that stimulated Yogg-Saron? Or was it something else? Duque had no way of knowing. The only thing he was sure of was that General Wiseax was roaring like he was on steroids. Half of the 4 Guardians of the Treasure Vault were on their knees at the start. Although Corellon was trying hard to communicate with the fire elemental world and use the power of the fire elemental to repair his body, it would obviously take time. If Duque left to deal with Mimiron during this period, the 4 Guardians might all be on their knees in less than 10 minutes. There must be something wrong with the surrounding environment or something. Otherwise, there was no reason for such an abnormal difference in strength. Duque did not make another move. It was Blind Princess's 8 hits that he forced himself to make a move despite knowing that something was wrong. It had been a long time since Duque had faced such a formidable enemy. System Elf. Duque called his old partner in the Sea of Consciousness. Yo, dear host, I find that you always think of me when you're in trouble. I'm so sad. Duque's face darkened. Seeing that Duque was in a bad mood, the system elf stopped joking. Okay, I'll stop teasing you. Substitute the data model and begin to analyze the environmental data. Perhaps this was the so-called fierce operation. It only took a second for the system elf to give the answer. After incomplete analysis by the system, the surrounding space shows unstable half-space characteristics. No spatial interfaces of the 4 elemental realms have been detected within a radius of 200 meters. A large amount of biological tissue suspected to be the ancient god Yogg-Saron has been detected in the surrounding subspace crevices. It is the existence of these biological tissues that repel the entry of the four major elements. Wait. This was a little unpleasant. Duque's face was turning green. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Could they have been eaten by Yogg-Saron? Yogg-Saron was known as the Demon of 1,000 Throats or the Beast of 1,000 Throats. Legend had it that it had 1,000 mouths. Since it had 1,000 mouths, it had 1,000 esophagus. Regardless of whether it had 1,000 stomachs, staying in Yogg-Saron's body was definitely not a good thing. And speaking of Yogg-Saron's territory, one had to be reminded of the great brainwashing method. This wasn't a move that could be dodged just by leaving the group and saving his IQ. Yogg-Saron could create different dreams and make its victims indulge in them. In the end, their worldview would be completely distorted, and they would be reduced to being its dog. Duque did not know how much consciousness Yogg-Saron had left here. If there was a lot of consciousness, even he might be in danger. This time, Duque's real body was participating in the battle. At this moment, the three blockheads once again charged forward bravely. The rock guardian Alcafen unleashed a powerful attack. His fist instantly doubled in size, and he probably gathered all of the earth elemental energy in this space into his hand. Then, he fiercely smashed downwards. With a loud bang, the huge pincer on the right side of General Vezix turned from three-dimensional to two-dimensional, as thin as paper. Unfortunately, in the next second, the general used his left hand to slap the ice watcher, Turawan, who was next door. Something strange happened. The general's disintegrated right pincer quickly swelled back as if it was blown up, turning into a perfect pincer. This was not superficial work, but the hardness and toughness of the pincer had returned to its peak. This was because the general had used this recast pincer to fight fiercely with the storm watcher Amaran on the spot. What? Impossible! Several watchers exclaimed at the same time. Duque slapped his forehead. Did you forget the key point I told you? Turawan suddenly realized. Ah! Alcafen, you have the mark of the faceless on you. Get lost. Since Duque wanted them to block Vezix, he would naturally tell them the strategy. Only now did Duque realize that this was a bit too much. He did not know if it was a natural flaw when the Titans created these guardians, or if their brain circuits were different from humans. Once they encountered a situation they did not know, they would choose to use their best moves and skills to attack instead of carefully observing the situation. The mark of the faceless was one of the most special secret methods. When the general placed it on an enemy, the enemy would produce a curse that would cause special irresistible shadow damage to the people around them. Then this shadow power would return to Vezix's body after robbing the target's life force, repairing the damage. It had to be said that the general's mark was quite cunning. It was a serial trap. If the four watchers did not care, then the general was invincible. Just by relying on the mark, he could repair any injury on his body. He did not even need to attack. Just the damage from the mark could exhaust the other three watchers to death, and then he could fight Alcafen alone. What if he did? The watchers were all big giants, and Alcafen, who had the strongest defense, was excluded. The remaining two watchers were also very dangerous. In the end, one of the reasons was that the general had heavily injured the Flame Watcher, leaving the four watchers incomplete. Most importantly, Yogg-Saron seemed to have given Vezix a special power, enough. There won't be any results if you keep fighting like this. Do you still remember our agreement? If you still want to fulfill your duty as a watcher, then run in 4 directions to the designated location and use the Titan rune chain to transfer the elements to me. Duque roared. Every watcher saw a shining virtual image of the Titan rune at the designated location, each representing the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind in the Titan language. Needless to say, that was their location. Even though he was unwilling, even the injured Corellon began to run to the designated location. Intruders, your opponent is me. General Vezex roared in an incomparably domineering manner. With a leap slash, he pounced on the Ice Watcher Turawan. But just as he flew into the air, a golden arrow that exuded an incomparably powerful holy aura suddenly shot towards his head. Huh! This is... Not knowing what it was, Vezex twisted his huge body in the air out of an instinctive aversion to holy power, so that his ugly face that looked like a windmill avoided the golden light. In the air, a small golden figure was suspended in the air. When the golden light returned to Duque's right hand, Vezex saw that it was actually a small spiral-shaped golden sword. Of course, in the size of a human, it was a long sword. Substitute, Vezex. From this moment on, your opponent is me, Duke Marcus. Chapter 1619. Plans could not keep up with changes. This was Duque's biggest feeling. Since the four wardens couldn't handle General Vezex, Duque could only roll up his sleeves and do it himself. The original version of Despair Aura reduced attack speed and blocked most mana regeneration methods. Now, the strengthened Despair Domain was even more powerful. It directly sealed the four elemental realms and Azeroth in this area. Ever since Duque mastered the 100 Hands battle technique, he had relied on massive amounts of magic power to replenish himself, replacing quality with quantity and stacking his enemies to death. Of course, it was great to be able to fight against thousands of enemies with an unlimited supply of mana. By cutting off the elements realm, General Vezex had forced Duque to a dead end. At this moment, Duque finally realized that he had a serious flaw. His upper limit of mana was still not high enough. Normally, he had the four major elemental realms and the weave to replenish his mana, so of course he didn't feel anything. Now that the other party had even temporarily cut off Duque's connection to the weave, Duque had almost suffered a setback. Fortunately, Duque had a plan B. When the four watchers ran in four different directions, the general could only watch helplessly. As a super powerhouse who could attack from both close and long range, the general did not lack long-range attacks. Unfortunately, his real killer move still relied on the shadow energy when Tide of Darkness was activated to increase his close-range attack power. In this state, because of the overload of shadow energy in his body, his movement speed was greatly reduced. He wanted to stop the four watchers, but Duque made his move. Oh la, oh la, oh la, oh la. At this moment, Duque seemed to have been possessed by a certain Jiro. As he swung his fists continuously, every punch brought with it a loud sound like a sonic boom. They were fists formed by arcane impact. However, it was definitely not a normal punch, because every time the arcane energy struck the giant ugly face of the general, the next arcane energy would follow the trajectory of the previous punch. Not only was this the superposition of arcana technique energy, but it was also the best use of arcana technique energy. Magic released by ordinary powerhouses would dissipate on the spot after hitting the enemy. Duque wasn't. Almost every drop of arcane energy contained Duque's will, or the control of the system elf. After the attack on General Vezex, the energy did not dissipate immediately or disintegrate by the Despair realm. When the next attack came, these energy clusters would be attracted to each other like magnets, and once again, they would be attached to the new attack and hit the general twice, thrice, or even countless times. Although it looked like he was attacking mindlessly, in fact, it was more like he was driving a pile, repeatedly bombarding the same point. Without a choice, the general, who was already a bit dizzy from Duque's continuous attacks, raised its massive pincers, entering a defensive stance for the first time. Do you think this is the end? In a flash, Duque appeared behind the general. He crossed his arms and looked solemn. When he slashed out with both hands, two sharp white lights shot out from his hand blades. It was an attack aimed at the weak spot between the general's two crab pincers and elbows. Duque didn't have Alcafon's ability to gather the power of the earth and then strike down with an unstoppable destructive force. Duque's magic, on the other hand, was more targeted. When Duque poured out the magic in his body's ice circuit, the damage caused was even more astonishing. 2 sharp 5-meter-long icicles appeared out of thin air and fiercely pierced the crab pincers from the elbow joint. Ah, General Vizax screamed. He found that the nerves in his hand had been completely destroyed by Duque's attack just now. No longer caring about anything else, the general's body suddenly bloomed with a blazing flame, splashing toward the audience. Burning flame. Normally, this terrifying flame would engulf the audience and indiscriminately attack everyone except the general. The funny thing was that the general was probably anxious. Or perhaps, this arrogant faceless simply didn't care about what kind of existence this little demigod was? Ha ha ha. In this world, there are probably only 3 or 4 guys who dare to set fire in front of me. Unfortunately, you're not one of them. Duque couldn't stop laughing. The fire of the Balrog Ragnaros was close to the origin of the fire elemental world. Duque couldn't handle it. Kill Jaden the Deceiver's hellfire contained the Burning Legion's unique dark energy seasoning. Even Duque couldn't handle it. But for an amateur demigod monster to want to play with fire in front of Duque, that would be ridiculous. The flames that were sent out were skewed at a speed visible to the naked eye. With the general as the center, almost half a circle of flames near Duque were all sucked in by Duque like a whale sucking water. The flames that should have covered the sky and raged the audience were highly condensed in Duque's palm in 2 breaths, turning into a fireball the size of a rubber ball. It was just that the brightness of the fireball was 100 times greater than the original flames. Although it was not as bright as the sun, in the eyes of the general, it was almost the same as the sun. The amount of fire elements that were really sucked in by him was not much. In fact, it was not 100% under his control. It was just that after being injected with Duque's own fire elements, this super-concentrated fire elemental ball completely became Duque's slave. At this moment, Duque wondered if he was holding a small nuclear reactor in his hand. Yo, I'll pay you back double. Duque couldn't stop laughing. The next second, a shadow of Duque appeared. It took the small sun from Duke's main body and charged forward with the momentum of destroying everything indiscriminately. Boom! This was a violent blow that shook the entire Guardian Shrine area. In Duque's imagination, this blow should be able to cripple Vizax, if not kill him. But the effect was just passable. At the critical moment, the general used the 6 crab legs on his back to block in front of him. The explosion did hurt him, but it only blew away 3 crab legs. Many of the 2 crab pincers in front of him also exploded, revealing large chunks of muscle, but it was not fatal. F***CK. Duque was a little annoyed. He had almost emptied the magic in the 3-elemental magic circuit, but he was only slightly injured. This was not fun. At this moment, the first rune chain full of Titan runes suddenly flew over from the void. Hee hee. Someone sent me a pillow when I was feeling sleepy. Duque was amused. The first to arrive was the Storm Watcher Amaran. Half of his huge body was out of the general's domain. When he could reconnect with the wind elemental world, he immediately shot the rune chain at Duque. This thing was like a gas pipeline. With it, even if the general opened his domain, he could not stop the wind elements from flowing into Duque. Hee hee. If wireless transmission doesn't work, I'll use a direct connection. Chapter 1620. Hee 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 hee. Du Bois was in a good mood. It was like a patient with severe internet addiction who was forced to work in a ravine with no signal. He had a top-of-the-line laptop but could only play Minesweeper. Then, he managed to get on the internet. Although it was wired, he was touched. It was really indescribable. Duque was revived. It wasn't just full HP. That feeling was simply like a set of godly equipment on one's body. She felt so good about herself that she could totally trample on the Thunder Cliff. Oh, no, it was trample on the ice throne. Her fists could distort the void, and she could drag Sargeras down from the throne with one hand and sit on it herself. He didn't take his medicine today, so he felt cute. God said that the wind will blow away all filth. At this moment, Dumuk seemed to be possessed by a godly huckster. The wind element that was slightly overflowing from his body was so strong that it actually caused a powerful tornado with just the aftershock. He pointed with his right hand, and 36 gusts of wind jumped out from between his fingers. They directly spread into curved wind blades with a radius of nearly 10 meters, wantonly cutting everything in their surroundings. This wasn't an attack directly aimed at General Vezix. This was using the wind element to destroy the surrounding biological tissues of Yogg-Saron that overlapped with this space. SSSSSSS, it clearly looked like the wind blades didn't hit anything, but there was a faint sound of silk tearing in the air. Then, a second rune chain flew through the air, every Titan rune blossoming bright red. This was a gift from the Flame Watcher, Corellon. The injured Watcher's body stretched out of the general's territory, and only his intact arm stretched in. The rune chain formed by 1024 runes was like the skyline of the entire dark space, and it heavily stimulated Vezix's nerves. Roar, no matter how stupid the general was, he knew how terrible it was to let Duque obtain an unlimited supply of magic power. He suddenly pushed out a huge shadow energy ball from his pincers. Shadow Strike. Duque was stunned when he saw this thing, and then he laughed. Not to mention the power of this thing, just looking at its swaying slow attack speed, Duque almost burst out laughing. Moreover, as a veteran player who had experienced the Battle of Alder, as long as he did not take the first hit, this thing was a treasure. Other people were afraid of being hit by shadow-type attacks, but Duque was also afraid. But a low-level mystery was destined to be eaten by a higher-level mystery. Duque did something that no one present could believe. He rushed to block the huge shadow energy cluster before it hit Corellon's Flame Titan rune chain. Flash, using his face to block the attack. Even the 4 Great Guardians, including the 4 Great Guardians, felt that Duque had taken the wrong medicine. However, the expected shadow energy did not cause any damage to Duque. Instead, Duque's mysterious and strange prayer echoed in the room. Light comes from darkness, and from darkness comes light. These were the brainwashing words that Duque had used to convert Archeron's curse. General Faceless, who has long been sealed in his own world, would never hear about this Duque's glorious feat, but this did not prevent everyone from seeing that the general's shadow attack was ineffective. The shadow energy that Duque had actually converted was perhaps less than 20% of this energy cluster. Duque had mostly dispelled this energy. This time, the key point was deterrence. You can't use fire. You can't use shadow either. What other means do you have? Use them all. Duque said coldly and arrogantly. General W. Zach's eyes almost popped out. Now, Duque was clearly bullying him because he was not a magician, using the difference in elemental control to bully him. If there was anything that he could beat Duque in, it was close combat. Duque was a fragile pharaoh. How could he compete with a big guy like you in terms of wrist strength? You want to punch me and see who falls first? Don't be ridiculous. Originally, when Duque received Corellon's fire elemental supply, he wanted to directly give W. Zax a fierce blow. But when Duque saw Corellon's half-dead appearance, he reduced his demand for fire elemental energy. Corellon, I'm not in a hurry. You should fix your body first. Okay. The Flame Watcher finally nodded. Now that Duque had the upper hand, his demand for fire elemental energy was not so urgent. 3 seconds later, the Frost Watcher Turawan's ice elemental energy also came. The long ice elemental Titan rune floated over like a beautiful staff. The glittering and translucent runes danced in the air, transmitting more ice elemental energy to Duque's body. This level of elemental purity. The second half of Duque's sentence was impressively, "If only these guys were willing to work for my magic network." He did not wait for the slowest Earth Watcher Alcavan. After all, wind and earth elemental energy were not Duque's expertise. When the ice elemental energy once again filled every corner of the ice magic circuit in Duque's body, Duque brazenly made his move. With his left index finger, a huge, semi-illusory female figure suddenly appeared behind Duque. It was a very Greek-style virtual image of a goddess. Because there was no physical body, her face could not be seen clearly. Only a few lines made of ice elemental energy outlined a perfect woman's face. She carried a huge water bottle on her shoulder and slowly tipped it down. What gushed out of the bottle was almost the world's highest and purest ice elemental energy. God said, "The goddess of twilight will forgive you." Duque read out the name of the move in an extremely pretentious manner. But he was secretly pleased. F***CK. I've wanted to do this for a long time, and I finally found the opportunity. Goddess of Twilight's forgiveness. In reality, when one reached the demigod realm, all magic attacks, unless they exceeded the scope of Duque's ability and understanding, were simply a matter of extracting elemental energy and shaping it. It did not matter what form it took. What mattered was the purity, density, and level of mystery of the elemental energy. Even Duque himself could not refine such an exaggerated amount of ice elemental energy. Since there was a watcher created by the Titan to help him, Duque took advantage of the situation. The ice elemental energy pouring out of the water bottle instantly turned into a sea of ice. It was flowing ice water, as well as countless ice shards. Wherever the ice elemental energy covered, heaven and earth would be frozen, and all living things would die. The entire hall, be it the floor, the pillars, or the huge dome that was 100 meters tall, were all filled with ice. "No, I am the servant of the great Yogg-Saron. Mere ice can't stump me." General Vezex was still struggling. More and more ice cubes were squeezing to his side. Although the ice cubes were exploding into ice slags under his terrifying brute force, in less than a tenth of a second, the ice slags and liquid would be turned back into ice cubes driven by the freezing air of absolute zero, trying to confine his body. Chapter 1621. The giant pincer's movements were getting slower and slower. The general felt that he could no longer struggle. "No. I am the servant of the great Yogg-Saron. I am invincible. General Vezex was still struggling, but everyone knew that his resistance was futile. Finally, Archavan, who was the slowest of them all, arrived at their destination. In the end, the earth element that Duque was most unfamiliar with came. It was a rune chain made of Titan runes that rose from the ground, transmitting an endless stream of elemental energy. Arcane, fire, and frost were the main ones, and holy, shadow, and nature, thunder, were the auxiliary ones. Of the 6 elements that Duque could manipulate, none were like the earth element. As the foundation of all things, the earth element was the least active. Although Duque could barely command these elements to move to a specific place, it was a terrible feeling. Duque was like a rich second generation who was used to driving a supercar that only needed 3 seconds to go from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. How could he get used to driving a tractor, the kind of crappy tractor that was commonly seen in the countryside? There are some things that you just can't get used to. Duque complained. At the same time, he poured the earth element under Vezek's feet. The ground of the temple was surging violently. Large chunks of earth broke out of the floor tiles and formed something like a wave, swallowing the huge lower body of the general. Duque stretched out his hands and sent a telepathic message to the Ice Watcher, Turawan. The latter immediately cooperated fully. Immediately after, a heavenly amount of ice elemental chi that could overturn rivers and seas appeared. Turawan had used up all his strength. "Thank you very much," Duque softly replied in the telepathic message. He held a tish in front of his chest with both hands, his left hand clockwise and his right hand counterclockwise, rubbing the handle of the staff. Along with Duque's movements, two huge ice elemental hands that were 10 meters long appeared in the middle of the ice layer. These two ice elemental hands were far denser than the other ice cubes. If these ice cubes formed by high-purity ice elements were at a level that could only be penetrated by icicles, then these two ice elemental hands were like diamonds in the mortal world. Crack, crisp and continuous sounds of cracking could be heard from the layer of ice. Accompanied by Duque's complex rubbing, the two large ice hands grabbed Vezek's shoulders and tore the general's body apart with the most primitive and violent absolute strength. "Don't underestimate me," the general roared. Behind him, the tide of darkness surged wildly. This violent shadow energy gave him even greater strength. In the ice layer, it was as if two giants were wrestling. However, Duque's side was even more shameless. Under the continuous struggle of strength, the frost elements unrestrainedly squeezed in through every hole and crevice on the general's body, wantonly destroying the general's nerves, muscles, and blood vessels. Yogg-Saron subordinates, faceless, have a strong vitality. However, the destructive power of the frost element was on a cellular level. The low temperature of absolute zero could easily freeze the water in the cells. When a unit of water is turned into ice, the ice occupies a larger volume. When the water in the cells turns into ice, the cells will burst from the inside out. At first, General Vezek didn't notice it, just as it was difficult for the human body to notice the withering of a certain hair. Gradually, he realized something was wrong. The numbness from his limbs made him instinctively feel that something was wrong. He wanted to seek energy and replenish his cells through the mark of the faceless, but bitterly found that within his range, there was only Duque. When all his means of attack were reduced to a joke, the result was already decided. "Eche!" Duque shouted. The general's carapace, which had been largely eroded by the frost elements, couldn't withstand the double effect of the cold and the tremendous force. Just as Duque shouted, the general's hammer-like pincers were the first to be torn off. Ah! Vezek's huge body struggled to shake. It was an instinctive struggle. No matter how he screamed, he couldn't stop the two large pincers from being dragged by the ice hands into this icy hell. Then there were the two thick legs. Any one of his legs could be used as the main beam of Ogrimar's King's Valley Hall, but after his body was eroded by the frost and became cold and brittle, he couldn't resist the tremendous force from the ice hands. The frost magic circuit in Duque's body had been operating at its maximum speed. Even with his strength, it was a huge burden to use such a large amount of ultra-high-purity frost elements. Now it all depended on who could hold on longer. Humph! A cold snort. The ice hands exerted force again and tore off his left thigh. 3 seconds later, it was his right thigh. His tail, which was as thick as a drill, followed closely behind. Finally, it was Vezek's ridiculous wings, which looked like 6 crab legs. When Duque finished all this, the ultra-high-density condensed frost elements from the floor to the dome in the hall suddenly exploded. Bang! Crisply and neatly, all the ice turned into crystal dust and was expelled by the evil energy that enveloped the entire Otter Guardian Temple. Of course, everything was settled. Awoo! General Vezek, who had been insufferably arrogant a few minutes ago, now looked extremely miserable. Apart from his head, all his limbs had been torn off and turned into a human stick. Oh, no, a lobster stick. At this time, even the shell of his body had been completely destroyed by the frost elements, leaving only a ball of white, tender, and bloodshot flesh. He looked like a fat worm. As the largest hole in his body, his facial features had been thoroughly invaded by the frost elements and were completely distorted. Why do I suddenly feel that this guy looks a little interesting? Kolalan, who had been severely injured, was the most gloating. With heavy footsteps, the 4 great watchers surrounded him. Arkevan asked, "What do we do now?" Before we take care of the other 3 guardians, I'll leave this place to you two, Duke ordered. No problem. Everything is for the Creator. Archavon pounded his chest. Duque glanced at General Vezex, who was wriggling on the ground like a worm. As for him, if his limbs grow out again, pull them out. But we can't let him die prematurely. Hee. Happy to help. Kolalan grinned hideously. He stretched out his big hand that was covered in blazing flames and touched it. He tore off a large piece of flesh that was growing rapidly on the general's arm and completely destroyed it. Chapter 1622. I'm just afraid that he'll use other means to inform Yogg-Saron. Turawan added. It's fine. Duque chuckled. I'll leave this to you, Isra. A soft voice came from the void. If Isra, the dragon aspect who controlled the Emerald Dream, was allowed to suppress Yogg-Saron, something might really happen. But she was more than enough to suppress an ancient god servant and prevent it from sending out a warning signal without participating in the battle. Phew. Letting out a long sigh of relief, Duque finally had the time to sense the situation on the other battlefields. Queen Sylvan's battle against the Guardian of Life, Freya, had just reached the point of killing the first Elder Ancient Tree. After carefully sensing the elemental reserves of both sides, Duque was relieved. On the other side, in the severe winter hall, Onyxia and Vashj were up against Hodier, the guardian of the Temple of Winter. There was not much suspense in the battle here. Onyxia was not weak to begin with, and with Vashj, who was also a demigod, with 2 bosses ganging up on one boss, Duque felt a little embarrassed. Once upon a time, Duque had also been worried about the cooperation between these two. After all, they were used to working alone. One was a princess, and the other was a Naga queen. They were proud from the bottom of their hearts. Apart from Duque, they were not convinced by anyone. At least he had caught Vashj to tame the dragon together, and after teasing the Naga a few times, he had finally subdued them. At least they would not undermine each other. In the image sent by the magician's eyes, Onyxia was the main attacker, and Vashj was the support. If Hodier tried to freeze something, Vashj would remove the seal and use lightning arrows to restrain Hodier. The scales of victory were slowly tipping in the favor of the 2 women. What they really had to pay attention to was Mimiron. Because they could not wait for Duque, the Alliance of Heroes had already launched an attack on Mimiron on time, according to their previous agreement. From the Temple of Invention, also known as the Temple of Creation, the great inventor Mimiron still brought his black technology equipment and weapons. In terms of his main body's battle prowess, Mimiron was just trash. Miss Sally Whitemane, who was a priest, could teach him a lesson with a hammer. Unfortunately, his underlings were as numerous as the hairs on an ox. Moreover, he had several great killing weapons. First was the heavy infantry tank, the Flaming Beast 2 Malawian Quachas. This thing's appearance was a smaller version of the Flaming Beast that Duque and the others had fought before at the city wall area. The form was the same, but the inside had been changed by Mimiron. The equipment and skills were completely different. Moreover, because this was the interior of the temple, the previous vehicles could not enter. Now, the Alliance experts had no choice but to use their physical bodies to deal with this smaller steel beast. When Duke looked over, he saw that Gavin Rad's hair had been set on fire. He had no choice but to cut off his hair and cut off the black hair on his head with a sword. It looked like it was heading towards the Mediterranean Sea. Duque smiled bitterly and held his forehead. What the hell? I've been tricked by a little less spoiler. To avoid arousing suspicion, Duque did not reveal the detailed strategy of Oder to the Alliance this time. All the inside information was leaked by Torim, the traitor. After Loken was killed in Odin and Tyr's absence, as one of the 4 remaining guardians, Torim knew everything about Oder. But that was based on all the known information. Before Torim left Oder, Tarim told him everything he knew without holding anything back. Tarim didn't know anything about Yogg-Saron. Similarly, he didn't know what Mimiron, who was always tinkering with new inventions, had. The Alliance's hero group encountered Mimiron without any information, and then they were tricked by the shrunken mechanical tank that looked the same. "Those are landmines. Don't step on them," Bu Lang yelled. There were always people who made mistakes in a hurry, such as Riataline. She should have been fine when she followed Kalia, who had tiptoed through 2 landmines. Unfortunately, that was a high-sensitivity landmine. The Blood Elf Paladin didn't touch the landmine, but her shield swung over it and detonated the landmine. Bang! There was a loud bang, and a flame shot up into the sky within a 10-yard radius. If she hadn't activated the Holy Shield spell at the critical moment and forcefully entered an invincible state with super-dense holy light, she would have broken a leg. The next second, seeing dozens of missiles flying in crooked trajectories fly up from the back of Little One's flame behemoth, Bu Lang's face turned green again. "The rockets are coming, dodge." Perhaps because the rockets were too focused on accuracy, they weren't fast. If the Alliance powerhouses wanted to dodge, they could basically dodge them. However, every time a rocket hit the metal floor, it would definitely ignite a large area. This was a gasoline rocket bomb. If you were even a little bit touched by this thing, you would become a man on fire. Without enough holy light or natural spells to heal you, you would turn from a man on fire to someone familiar. Yes, the kind that smelled like barbecued meat. Unfortunately, when the entire flame chariot lit up with lightning and dense crackling sounds of electricity rang out, everyone's formation was disrupted again. "Get out of the way." This time, it was Theon who shouted. Because he had accidentally gotten too close, even he had almost been hit. This kind of ultra-high voltage electricity sputtering would kill someone in an instant if they were touched. At this moment, Mimiron's Hall of Inventions was filled with fire, and there were fewer and fewer places for people to stand. Everyone was forced into chaos by the rampaging flame behemoth, and it could be said that it was a mess. It was in this situation that Magni saw in despair that the thick main cannon on top of the flame behemoth was aimed at him. The Shorty King no longer cared about his demeanor and shouted shamelessly, "I don't have Avatar anymore. Protect me, or we will all die together." That's right, in the previous wave of attacks, Magni had almost single-handedly taken the flame behemoth's plasma cannon head-on. Unlike traditional cannons, this black technology cannon that should not have appeared in Azeroth was completely like a laser cannon. Whether or not it was plasma remained to be seen. In any case, Magni, who could take the full attack of Balrog Ragnaros, knew that under normal conditions, he would not be able to take this kind of concentrated attack that lasted for 7 seconds. It was not that he did not try to dodge, but he could not. Instead, there was one time when Chandris attacked too fiercely and attracted the main cannon's attack. Even a sentinel leader like Chandris, who was favored by the moon goddess, almost fell. In order to save her adopted daughter, Tyrant used up a precious god-given protective item. This time, when he saw the plasma cannon's light pouncing towards him and filling his entire field of vision, Magni shouted, "Duke! You bastard, why are you still not coming?" Chapter 1623. It was better to be late than never. Just as Magni was about to raise his shield to take the ion cannon blast head-on with his short stature, a beautiful ice prism appeared in front of him. The extremely flat mirror surface was spotless, and the clarity of the mirror made one wonder if it was glass or ice. The extreme cold aura emanating from it let Magni know that this mirror was definitely a frost elemental creation. The ice prism formed a 45-degree angle with Magni and blocked in front of him. Sizzle, a strange sound. What was even stranger was that the main cannon attack that had just caused Magni so much pain was reflected. A 45-degree angle of entry and a 45-degree angle of exit. The gorgeous ion cannon attack flew out at a perfect right angle in front of the short king. A lifelike image of Magni appeared in front of the mirror, and then made an exaggerated fall to the ground. He let out a pitiful cry like a duck being butchered alive, and fell dead on the ground. Magni, who was behind the ice prism, was dumbfounded. It was too lifelike. If this illusion wasn't exactly the same as him, and if it was his brother Muradin or Bulang, Magni might have believed it himself. Alright, regardless of whether Magni believed it or not, the giant flaming beast two Malawian Quachas believed it. Seeing that the human figure in the light of the ion cannon had been completely disintegrated, and that the giant beast's battle result evaluation system showed target destroyed, Mimran casually stopped the energy output of the main cannon. Although he didn't think much of this short mortal who could enlarge his body, the vague sense of threat in his heart made him instinctively try to preserve the giant flaming beast's energy. In the next instant, a bright red outline of a human appeared on the screen in Mimran's control room. The giant beast enemy tracking system's warning sounded. High energy life form detected. High energy enemy target detected. Target's combat level is assessed to be demigod. Rating, highly dangerous. Mimran's mechanical eyes, which were the size of goose eggs, instantly focused and narrowed down. Isn't it here now? Anyone would be shocked to hear a voice suddenly reverberating in their ears. But hearing that familiar and lazy tone, everyone calmed down as if they had taken a tranquilizer. Better late than never. Is it done over there? Magni asked. General Vezek's mutant lobster? Duque smirked. Sorry. I sliced him into lobster balls. With a wave of his hand, Duque displayed a three-dimensional projection. In the picture, a big meatball with only a head left was twitching and screaming, because the newly grown limbs would be torn off and destroyed by the bulky guardians. Having strong regenerative abilities was originally a good thing, but in this situation, it was a hellish torture. Mimran's mechanical eyes flashed, and no one knew what he was thinking. He raised his mechanical arm and pressed a green button. Pooh. Puff. Pft. The continuous sounds of the lids being opened could be heard. The back half of the flaming beast Mk2's top opened row after row of lids, revealing the spherical red missile heads inside. Duque chuckled. Damn it. Do you really think I've never seen a missile cabin before? Due to the limitations of the era, even someone as sharp as Magni didn't know what those missiles were. Perhaps to the Shorty King, they were a new type of cannonball. As a transmigrator, Duke could be influenced by a series of giant robot animations such as Transdimensional Fortress and Gundam. Plus, he had been watching military channels for a long time. If he couldn't even recognize this, then he could drown himself with a bucket of tofu. Mimiran. Show me something new. This stuff of yours isn't enough. Duque stretched out his right hand and snapped his fingers. In an instant, over 100 magicians' hands appeared in the air above the entire workshop. The might of the 100-armed Reaper had reappeared. Whoosh! 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 The pure arcane missiles hit the warhead before Mimiran's missiles even left the cabin. Mimiran was indeed a genius, but no matter how powerful a genius was, he would not consider many details without going through the test of battle. For example, the safety of the missiles. What if the warhead with the firing mechanism was accidentally attacked prematurely? Bang! 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 Continuous sounds of explosions rang out on top of the raging flame beast's head. One had to know that Mimiran's flaming beast used a napalm rocket bomb. Once the warhead was destroyed, the gasoline inside would instantly splatter everywhere. Not only did it splatter onto the flaming beast's head, but it also seeped into the missile tube. The flaming beast was just a machine, not a fire elemental creature. Whether it was the one guarding the city wall or this shrunken, improved model, they were not immune to fire. Duque destroying the rocket bomb prematurely was no doubt Mimiran had shot himself in the foot. This feeling was definitely exhilarating. In an instant, the Alliance's powerful fighters who had scattered to avoid the rocket bombs all let out strange cheers. Originally, Mimiron still had the landmines, but he hesitated at the last moment. If the rocket bomb could not be launched, then the slower landmines would naturally be intercepted before they could even land on the ground. Mimiron grabbed the steering wheel with both hands and stepped on the accelerator, directly driving the flaming beast towards Duque. At the same time, an intense bolt of lightning was brewing above the flaming beast. The corner of Duque's mouth curved into a mocking smile. Mimiron, if I use magic to defeat you, I'm sure you won't be satisfied. Fine, come on. You attack me with science, I'll defend against you with science. There was no wind elemental energy. What condensed on the flaming behemoth 2 Malawian kwachas was pure electrical energy produced by the battery and generator. Beep beep. On Duque's retina, the system showed that the voltage had reached 10,000 volts. This was a very impressive number. Even if Duque had Jurban's gnome technicians and inventors research electromagnetic coils to generate electricity, there was still a long way to go before high-voltage power transmission. Duque did not know if Mimiron had any talent in other areas, but at least in the field of electricity, Mimiron had won Duque's favor. Damn, if Mimiron hadn't used Titan runes to generate electricity, then he would have made a killing this time. Duque was even more determined to kidnap Mimiron. Duque shouted, "Treasures of God." 36 epic-grade long-handled weapons were thrown out by Duque from his storage bag and stabbed into the hard steel ground with hand of magic. Duque waved his hand. Come. Chapter 1624. Don't show off. Show off and get struck by lightning. Duque had grown up listening to this saying. However, if a demigod with wind and lightning attributes were to be struck to death by lightning, it would be an absolute disgrace. As for the flame beast's high-voltage external armor, Duque could actually take it head-on. The reason why Duque had set up 36 dung forks, the imitation version of the Shadow Strike, personally made by the #1 blacksmith in the Alliance, Magni Bronzebeard, and set up a lightning rod array, was to seduce it. Come on. Head on. Bah, bah, bah. The story of lightning rods and lightning rods could go on for an entire day. However, the conductivity of the 36 dung forks was absolutely unbeatable. 10,000 volts of high-voltage electricity was almost instantly directed away. The floor was made of steel, and it was superconductive. In addition, Duze had secretly manipulated the electricity and directed it back in the direction of the flame beast. Immediately, the flame beast fell for it. Bzzzt, 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 in every corner of the giant mechanical tank, there were sparks flying everywhere, and billowing black smoke was also coming out. Before Duque had arrived, the flame beast Mk2 had already suffered a lot of damage from the Alliance's powerhouses. Duque's arrival was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The loud bang signified that this giant toy that belonged exclusively to Mimiron was about to be destroyed. Logically speaking, the next one to appear was the VX-001 laser cannon. None of the Alliance's powerhouses knew about this move of Mimiron's, but Duque knew. In the original history, the Allied forces that had broken into this place had never seen such a novel and unimaginable thing, so they were all stunned. No one could predict how much the flame beast would be smashed to destroy it, so they could only attack with all their might. In the end, when Mimiron gave up on the flame beast and entered the laser cannon instead, everyone was a step too slow. Only Duque knew how fragile Mimiron was in the transition period between one mechanical creation and another. Duque seemed to be very excited as he continued to bombard the flame behemoth with fireballs. However, in his field of vision, Duque stared at the HP of the flame behemoth determined by the system. When the HP number hit 0, Duque moved. He activated Flash and instantly disappeared from everyone's sight. At this moment, no one but Duque noticed that a small round hatch had opened on the top of the blazing beast, and Mimiron, who was carrying a jetpack, ejected himself out. Any modern fighter jet on Earth has the ability to eject and so on. This was because the training fee for fighter pilots was extremely expensive. Even if a country was crippled, it would be extremely painful. Therefore, the ejection device was used to save the lives of the pilots in the crashed fighter. Mimiron's jetpack was an ejection device that transcended the Azeroth era. Unfortunately, he was caught by Duque almost as soon as he left the protection of the giant flaming beast. A huge arcane energy palm grabbed him with one hand. "Ah! Let me go! You barbarian! Let me go! Ah! The scene instantly quietened down. Without Mimiron as the mainframe, the various automatic defense systems that were still operating on the field all stopped working. The flame behemoth had already started to explode, and the laser cannons had yet to rise. It seemed like there was no way to fight anymore. Although everyone knew that this dwarf who looked like a dwarf but was actually made of metal was the guardian of the divine temple of creation, Mimiron. After all, this guy had mocked everyone before opening the portal, but it felt like this guy still had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. How did he get caught by Duque just like that? Do you know who you've caught? I am the greatest inventor, Mimiron, the faithful servant of the supreme god Yogg-Saron. Duque forced a smile and stretched the muscles on his face. Fool, stop shouting. You're being controlled. However, it was Torim who asked us to come to Oder to save the three of you and deal with that guy Yogg-Saron. Duque didn't waste any time and directly let the large hand of magic grab Mimiron's metal head, which was obviously disproportionate to his body and looked like it had eaten Somla milk powder, and smash it hard on the metal floor. Let me tell you, The huge arcane palm directly made Mimiron kneel in front of Duque in an oars posture, using his head to make intimate contact with the floor. I am. Wow. A magnificent and sonorous voice. Don't smash, the data will be lost. Who told you to believe in a cult? Just come under the command of the Duque Divine Church. Just like that, Duque put his hands behind his back and quietly pretended to be cool as he watched the dignified Titan Guardian kowtow to him. Well, of course, in the name of waking Mimiron up. On the side, the Alliance's powerhouses all looked at Duque, dumbfounded. They knew that Duque was awesome, but they didn't know that Duque was already this awesome. The Titan Guardian who had forced them into such a mess was captured and beaten up just like that? This big ceremony of 3 kneeling and 9 kowtows seemed to be even more impressive than that of his own subjects. Magni stroked his big beard and muttered to himself, "Hey! Third brother, should we change the etiquette of meeting the king in the future to kowtowing like this? It looks pretty cool." Bulang looked at his big brother who was occasionally going off the rails and rolled his eyes. "Big brother, we dwarves don't have that kind of patience. Do you believe that if you issue a new order here, the dwarves below will shoot you? They can't kill me." Magni shrieked. "Then at least it feels good." "Alright, you're right." While the unruly fellow was teasing them, Mimiron seemed to have sobered up. "Enough. Enough. Stop smashing. I remember now. Ugh. I'm the Titan Guardian, not that damn prisoner's servant. Damn it. Stop. Are you here to help or not?" Mimiron shouted as he waved his arms and legs. Duque looked at Mimiron, whose metal head had caved in from the kowtows, and finally didn't have the nerve to continue with his underhanded attacks. "You're really awake? Don't tell me you've been brainwashed and are pretending to be awake." Duque used the magician's hand to lift the little Mimiron. Bullsh*T. Damn native. If I didn't have to get Oder back first, would have killed you. Damn Loken, damn liar. Mimiron waved his arms and legs. Duque finally put Mimiron down. You said that Tarim asked you to come here? I have the memory of you dealing with my flaming beasts. I know that you should be going against Yogg-Saron, but I want to confirm it. As Mimiron spoke, he took out something that looked like a welding torch from somewhere and burned his head. Under everyone's gaze, the caved-in head actually started to recover. He gave this to me. Duque handed over a Titan mark. The Guardians had a special way of communicating with each other that outsiders definitely wouldn't understand. Mimiron rolled his eyes at Duque. All right. I trust you. I don't know what's going on with the other Guardians, but I'm very angry now. Do you want to come with me to settle the score with Yogg-Saron? Chapter 1625. With that, Mimiron waved his hand, and a huge circular metal trapdoor on the ground opened. Amidst the roar, a gigantic humanoid robot rose from above. It was so huge that it affected the appearance of the city. Its body was mainly yellow, and its lower body was another flaming beast. Its body was like a big ball, but there was an octagonal glass porthole on its chest. Of course, that wasn't a real porthole. Duque could cut it out. Although it looked like Mimiron was sitting behind the porthole, it was actually just a display screen. The robot's head was round, and it had two light blue hexagonal eyes. It also had a pair of nondescript mechanical arms with 5 fingers. In any case, this thing looked really bad. Thinking about it, this thing was another flaming beast MKII, a laser launcher VX-001, and a simple combination of the Air Command Unit, which would normally only appear in the 3rd stage and had the same bird-like shape as Mimiron's head. Together, it was called Humanoid Combat Weapon V0L7R0N. In the Alliance camp, apart from Magni and Belang, who didn't know what aesthetics were, everyone else looked like they couldn't believe their eyes. Right. It was 2F** King Ugly. Duque estimated that if this thing was made into an anime on Earth, it probably wouldn't sell well even in the least developed Celestial Empire in the 80s. Ugly as it was, this thing's combat power was top-notch. This was because this robot had all the weapons and equipment of the previous 3 parts. His life goal was to use technology to slay a god. This was a description of someone like Mimiron. Although its power wasn't enough to kill Yogg-Saron directly, it was definitely a great help. Duque's face twitched. He had to say that this was an unexpected surprise. The huge robot that should have been dismantled by the Alliance army in the battle had now become a loyal subject and rejoined the ranks of the Alliance army. Duque appeared on the shoulder of the huge robot in a flash. He noticed something that looked like a camera, so he raised his hand and projected the image of a Gundam unicorn in his hand. The camera kept flashing, and Mimiron's voice came immediately. This. Do you like inventing and creating too? Yes. Unfortunately, I don't have the time today. Let's find a chance to have a good chat after we get rid of Yogg-Saron. That's great. Mimiron's voice was filled with excitement. We share the same interests. We're on the same path. My path is not lonely. Even if he was being controlled, Mimiron still had his previous memories. He suddenly thought he understood how Duque was able to catch him so accurately when he was changing mecha. If he wasn't from my robot faction, how could he possibly have such foresight? If not for the sense of duty that the Titan had planted in his heart driving Mimiron, he would probably have dragged Duque along without a care and chatted with him for 10 days to half a month. The Alliance leaders were all stunned. That's it? Jaina appeared beside Duque and asked. Duque shrugged. What else do you want? Fight for 300 rounds and then wait for Yogg-Saron to come out and kill us all? Boom! The foot of the robot was made up of the flaming beasts. The 4 huge wheels looked out of place before, but now that they were in the robot's territory, the proportions were very correct. As the robot that Mimiron piloted took the lead and arrived at the center of the Guardian's temple area, Duque suddenly realized that the other two sides were almost done at the same time. Two huge figures were walking out of their respective temples. Thump thump thump. Sylvanas was standing on the shoulder of the female giant Freya, the guardian of the Temple of Life. The Blood Elf Queen held Freya's neck with one hand majestically, allowing the strong wind that was stirred up by the female giant's strides to blow against her face and cloak. Next to her, Hodier, the guardian of the Ice Temple, was about the same. He didn't have Freya's regenerative ability, so he looked even more pathetic. There were many huge claw marks and damage on his shoulder armor. However, his eyes were shockingly bright, and the deep blue color made people panic. On his left and right shoulders stood two graceful beauties. Onyxia had the air of a countess, her left hand supporting her right elbow and her right hand holding a goose feather fan dyed black. Half of her face was covered by a lute, and she smiled smugly. Vashti returned to her maid's appearance, her hands crossed on her abdomen, looking like a maid who was ready to take orders at any time. But there shouldn't be any maid who would be so arrogant as to stand on the shoulder of a guardian, in front of outsiders. Onyxia and Vashti naturally gave Duque enough face. With a small jump, they landed on the ground and bowed to Duque. "Master, I'm glad that I didn't disappoint you." "Well done." Duque praised them calmly. In the Alliance hero group, Hofiriel stuck out his tongue, as if complaining that he had two demigods as servants. Duque really had no one else. "I'm done here too." Queen Sylvanas tapped her toes, and a gust of wind carried her down. Many of the Alliance's powerhouses noticed that Freya's expression seemed to be a little strange. Freya walked past Tarim, who seemed to have withered up and was almost dead. A pair of huge and graceful palms pressed on Tarim's chest, and a surging green brilliance was sent in just like that. The effect was immediate. Tarim, who looked like he had used up all his energy and was about to become a weathered stone statue, began to tremble violently. A few seconds later, he coughed 3 times and spat out a large black, sticky ball of liquid. "Ugh, Freya? You're awake." Freya bit her lip. "Yes. Thanks to the demigod of wind, Sylvanas Windrunner, she used a special method to wake me up. You guys." Tarim still did not seem to believe his eyes. He looked at Hodier, who was a little disheveled, and Mimiron, who looked fine. "I've recovered." Hodier's face was cold. "I don't want to talk about it." Mimiron's metal face did not have any expression at all. There seemed to be electricity surging back and forth between the 4 guardians. That was the unique telepathic communication between the guardians. Hodier was the first to speak. "Mortals, and the demigods of Azeroth, thank you for your help." Freya continued, "Although we'd like to say it, the next thing is about Guardian Odor." Mimiron said, "Obviously, the 4 of us together will not be a match for Yogg-Saron." Tarim said in a low voice, "Can we ask for your help again?" Duque exchanged glances with the Alliance's powerhouses and smiled. His voice shook the mountains and rivers. "For Azeroth, it is our duty." Chapter 1626. Yogg-Saron, the Beast of 1,000 Throats. How powerful was there's a silly dragon? In history, without the help of the 4 guardians of Odor, the chance of defeating this ancient god was 0. Not infinitely close to 0, but absolutely 0. Its true strength did not lie in its terrifying elemental attacks, nor did it lie in its god-level physical attacks that could destroy a city with one slap. Yogg-Saron's strength lay in its mental retardation, which was the legendary monkey's mental subtraction, passed down from generation to generation. As an ancient god who was the best at control, Yogg-Saron could use all kinds of dirty methods and attacks to attack the enemy's will. As long as someone's will collapsed and their intelligence dropped to 0, they would completely become Yogg-Saron's sole slave. Unless their soul was completely destroyed, even if they became an undead, they would still be loyal to Yogg-Saron. This was the so-called, you can't keep your intelligence even if you leave the group. It was not easy to nurture a strong person. From a weak elite, to cross the red line of hero, to a legendary hero, and then to a demigod, it was more than 1 in a million. Not to mention anything else, no matter who died in the alliance, Duque would die of heartache. However, the few ancient gods took turns to court death. If he did not beat these guys to death, Azeroth would not have a day of peace. Duque felt a little weak. Other than that, Yogg-Saron's style of play was essentially quite restrained against Duke, who was not strong-willed. Although Duque had grown up and could absorb the moral integrity of the saints as a supplement to his will, Duque was still a vulgar person who loved to have a harem and start showing off. If Yogg-Saron found Duque's weakness, it was unknown what would happen to Duque after Duque's mental barrier made by the system elves failed. Duque bit the bullet. With the 4 guardians gathered, Freya was the first to speak. The female giant said, "As long as I can free up my hands, I will help heal everyone. And I know that everyone is most worried about being controlled by Yogg-Saron and losing your mind again. I just contacted Odor's main control computer and loaded a part of the Clean Lorcan's ability. I can summon a few wells of wisdom in battle. As long as you're beside this well, everyone's mind will be nourished and the side effects of Yogg-Saron's mental attack will be reduced." Freya changed the topic. "I can use the Titan runic magic circle to calm everyone's mind. In return, it will weaken everyone's control over their own power. I estimate that the circulation speed of magic circuits for mages will be reduced by at least 30%. Duque secretly complained, "It's more like half." With Freya taking the lead, the other guardians did not hold back. Tarim swung his hammer. "I will use Titan Storm to attack all enemies." At the same time, a Titan rune magic circle opened under Tarim's feet. Within the purple lightning, almost everyone could feel that their life force was in a very mysterious and exuberant state. Duque was the only one who noticed that his HP had increased by at least 20%. This was Tarim's secret skill, Thorim's tenacity. "When you're in danger, I will use my eyes to protect you," Hodor said in a low voice. With a stomp of his foot, every alliance powerhouse present, including demigods like Duque, had a translucent thing that looked like an ice shield appear on the outside of their bodies. Hodor's strength reduce the speed of the enemy and reduce injuries. It's that simple and violent. Mimiron, who was in the huge robot, clapped his metal palm, and a palm-sized hemispherical platform rose up around the hall. A large pile of metal beads rolled out and quickly rolled to the side of every powerhouse's combat boots. With a click, they buckled onto the boots. Mimiron's divine speed can increase your running speed by 20%. The great inventor forcefully promoted his invention with certainty. "Don't tell me it's something like goblin rocket boots?" After saying that, he seemed to want to dig out the metal beads on the left and right sides of the boots. "Don't confuse my great invention with the goblin's idiotic things." Mimiron was annoyed. Goblin rocket boots had once been very popular in the Alliance. In theory, as long as the 2 spurs at the back of the boots touched each other, one's running speed would increase by more than 50%. However, it was made by goblins who killed people and set fire to gold. The goblins' success rate was really F***king touching. Not to mention the more than 50% chance of exploding, just the acceleration alone was enough to make people who weren't used to it despair. That was to tie 2 rockets to the heels of each shoe. Once they were activated and you couldn't maintain your balance, you would fly to who knows where. The scariest thing was that there was once an unlucky guy who experimented with the rocket boots, and his whole body was torn in half. In response to Magni's worry, Duque coughed twice. The greatest inventor's invention is definitely not a problem. Duque helped. Mimiron, this simple-minded guy with super high IQ and EQ, had a good impression of Duque on the spot. You know me best. After a short rest, with the 4 guardians taking the lead, the group marched in the direction of the Stairway of Madness. Soon, everyone saw the 4 guardians happily playing a sadistic game. Hee hee. Done? Alcavan grinned. Done. Still standing on the shoulder of Mimiran's robot, Duque nodded. Then you're useless. The Flame Guardian, Corellon, was the most ruthless General Vezex. He jumped on the spot. What kind of momentum would a 10-story tall giant have when he jumped up? Even a landslide would be nothing more than this. Corellon, who had gathered all the fire elements on his feet, fiercely kicked the ugly head of the general. The general's head exploded. There was no blood and flesh splattering everywhere. All the flesh and blood were instantly burned by the flames on Corellon's feet. Corellon, who was disgusted, was still worried. He burned the general's corpse with a fire. Humph. Every powerhouse of the Alliance snorted when they walked past the general's corpse. However, everyone knew that the real enemy was still in the crazy stairs. Every powerhouse's heart was heavy when it came to Yogg-Saron. The Guardians felt guilty for their dereliction of duty, while some of the Alliance powerhouses were a little emotional. Big Brother, is Yogg-Saron the guy who spread the curse of flesh and blood? Bulang asked. In a sense, the appearance of the various races in Azeroth was also a byproduct of the curse of flesh and blood spread by Yogg-Saron to weaken the Titan creations. I don't recognize this guy as the ancestor of the dwarves, Magni said fiercely. Chapter 1627. The Stairway of Madness. When Duque and his entourage entered this area in order, they did not know how to describe this place. The surrounding scenery was similar to the Guardian's Shrine District. It was still a gigantic palace built with giants as the standard. Everyone was here to slay the evil god. When they saw the gigantic Greek pillar that required dozens of people to wrap their arms around it, they had already gotten used to it. The shrine was still the same shrine, but the aura and atmosphere in the air were completely different. Everyone thought that this place would feel like Angela or the Hacker Shrine, filled with traces of worship for the evil god. Who would have thought that it was not like that at all? The surroundings were filled with a transparent aura, spreading a slight sense of joy. This feeling was very faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. However, Duque was very cautious. As a transmigrator, he had seen countless horror films and was well versed in the success of horror films. If the opening scene was filled with a terrifying atmosphere of death, then the horror film was destined to fail at the box office. From normal to terrifying, it was a single portion. From happiness to terror and despair, it was not a double portion, but 4 or even 10 times the impact. This was the psychological difference from heaven to hell. Therefore, the Paste's rule was to first create a joyous and peaceful atmosphere. Duque looked around. He thought that someone would notice it. Who knew that the calm wise ones did not see a single one, but the hoof in the middle of the waves did. La 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 la. Imriel skipped forward in a relaxed and joyful manner. That special, slightly crooked S-shaped leg was like a small spring. Its light posture reminded Duque of a primary school student carrying a small backpack to school on his first day. When worn on a hoof, it was like, I didn't take my medicine today, I feel cute. What the hell is cute? Duque was annoyed. Duque was furious. Without another word, he went up and grabbed the hoof's little tail that was swinging around. Ah! The hoof cried out in shock. Then, Duque gave its butt a flying kick, and it almost fell flat on its face. Duque, what are you doing? He didn't call Duque by his title. His hoof had improved. If he called Duque Commander, that would be fair to fair. Sha Dan. There's something wrong with the air. The moment Duque's voice fell, the experts of the Alliance all reacted in unison. Magni and the other scientists immediately took out gas masks from their storage space bags. Jaina had already activated Frost Barrier. In one breath, she expanded the barrier by 100 times, enveloping the entire Alliance hero group. She was already a breaking dawn, so this wasn't too much of a burden. Duque shook his head and said with a frown, "No, stop all of them. These things are useless. What I mean is that there's a strange spiritual energy in the surrounding air." Magni put away his gas mask, and Gianna retracted her shield. Huh? Thean and the others didn't understand. Do a lot of people feel a little happy and delighted? A little. Everyone thought about it. The calmer and more determined a person is, the less likely they are to be influenced. Everyone understood what Duke was trying to say. I don't get it. Magni said with a frown. Thean, Gavinrad, Merid, Riataline, and Imriel are all holy knights. The other four don't feel anything. Even if they don't believe in the holy light, they only feel a little excited. Why is it only Imriel? Imriel also seemed to realize that she was wrong. She covered her butt and stood there like she was wronged. She didn't dare to complain about Duque kicking her butt. Duque pressed a hand on Imriel's head. Didn't you notice? This fellow is the youngest. When Duque said the answer, Elucia and Kalia felt like arrows were shot in their hearts. From the perspective of humans, the elves and dwarves present were most likely old demons. In terms of age, these human females were all aunties. However, after gaining immortality, they ignored the age limit. Eternally 18, eternally beautiful like a flower. Even if the age of one's body was fixed, the gradual increase in age and experience would ultimately make one more mature. Hoof was the only one. Although she was already the leader, deep down, she was still a real girl. Duque suddenly felt a little envious of the Drenii. Their bodies grew up very early, and then it was an extremely long period of youth. When they finally died of old age, their bodies would rapidly deteriorate. Coupled with their amazing magic and combat talents, they were a natural-born warrior race. Duque looked at the aggrieved Hoof and sighed. At least he comforted her. It's okay. It's not a fault to be young, and none of us are against you. It's just that when we fight Yogg-Saron, anyone who is not strong-willed or has a gap in their heart may be targeted by Yogg-Saron. Perhaps when they are under mental attack, they will do a lot of shameful things. When that time comes, please forgive them. Merid walked up and bowed deeply to Duque with his burly body. Thank you for the reminder, Lord Commander. It's better to make a small mistake now than to make a fatal mistake when facing a strong enemy later. Our leader is young and impulsive, and needs your care and guidance. With that, he almost pressed down on the Hoof's head and bowed to Duque again. The Hoof was aggrieved, but did as he was told. There was no helping it. Merid was appointed by Valen as the Minister of Orders, and was responsible for guiding and supervising her. Merid would never argue with the Hoof over the big issues, but he would firmly punish her when she occasionally went off the track. The Hoof was a little afraid of Merid. On the surface, Duque accepted Merid's gratitude calmly. He was also very satisfied with the effect of making an example out of Merid, but on the inside, he was a little pained. I'm not afraid of anything happening to the Hoof, but I'm afraid of something happening to me. Duque was not afraid of simple head-on actions. But the mental attack of an ancient god and whatnot, it should be fine. After a little mobilization, everyone finally passed through the hall that was supposed to be General Vezek's stronghold and arrived at the top of the Stairway of Madness, the greatest temple of terror in Audr. There was no sign of Yogg-Saron in the huge arched temple that could fit several football fields. Everyone's eyes were on the Vrykul woman of unknown origin in the middle of the temple hall. It was a beautiful woman wearing a dark yellow shirt that exposed her navel and a dark green dress. Under his dark brown hair was a simple silver hairband, which served as a foil to his upright and handsome face. Since she was a Vrykul with a quasi-giant body, she was naturally not a pretty girl. She was at least 3 meters tall. Who was she? Chapter 1628. She calls herself Sala. She's the messenger of Yogg-Saron's will. She once claimed to be the so-called Master's Messenger. Freya, the guardian of the Church of Life, said through gritted teeth. Yogg-Saron's brainwashing was perfect. Even the memories of being enslaved still echoed clearly in the minds of the Guardians. This was definitely a stain that they would never be able to erase for the rest of their lives. If it wasn't for the duty that was much more important than their own lives and their souls, there might really be some Guardians who would choose to commit suicide to wash away their stain. Freya's words had angered Hodir and Mimiron. The chill around Hodir's body suddenly increased. Mimiron was even more direct. His huge robot had already begun charging. Even 100 meters away, one could clearly hear the mechanical sound of gears turning from slow to fast and accelerating. You traitors! How dare you come back? Didn't I ask you to guard this great temple? Sala spoke in a majestic female voice. It was quite uncomfortable to the ears of Duque and the others, like a male duck preparing to give a concert. For Freya and the others, it was a slap in the face. Hodir took a step forward, his voice like thunder. We are the servants of the great Pantheon Titan. Not the slaves of your dirty and disgusting master. We will make Yogg-Saron pay the price. This is none of your business. Get Yogg-Saron out. Ha ha ha. Sala let out a rough laugh. Lowly slaves of the Pantheon. Whose slaves do you think aren't slaves? You used to be my slaves. Even if you break free for a while, even if you bring companions who think they are strong. But I want to tell you, you and your companions will all become my slaves. Ha ha ha. She actually used I to address them. Could she be? Duque's face was as dark as water. Yes. Everyone, don't be careless. This woman named Sala is the incarnation of the ancient evil god Yogg-Saron. No one knew how powerful the incarnation of an evil god was. Presumably, the Guardians wouldn't mind beating her up as Yogg-Saron. Accept your punishment, evil god's incarnation. The most irascible Thunder Guardian Torim was the first to speak. At this moment, he had transformed into the god of hammers. He took the lead and raised the hammer that was filled with dazzling lightning. With a leap slash, he smashed the hammer into the ground. Don't. Duque reached out to stop Torim, but he had only said one word when Torim jumped over him. F***CK. At this moment, Sarah was invincible. Impulsiveness is the devil. In fact, it wasn't just Duque. Freya and the other 2 Guardians had also noticed the problem. That tiny incarnation of Yogg-Saron seemed to be right in the middle of his field of vision, but in fact, she did not exist in this hall at all. She was more like a projection that existed between reality and illusion. What's the use of you, Torim, directly using your ultimate move? Only Duque knew that Torim's actions were not only useless, but they were also more of a hindrance. With Sarah as the center of the battlefield, there were 5 green clouds from near to far, revolving around Sarah in concentric circles. At first glance, there was nothing special about these clouds. Only those with enough eyesight would realize that these were the exits of the 5 space passages. Torim, be careful. Your existence will serve as a spatial marker for those clouds. It will trigger more servants of the evil god to enter this world. According to Duque's experience in the game, without Torim's interference, these green clouds would naturally produce Yogg-Saron Guardians. At first, it would take about 30 seconds for one to appear. As time passed, the interval would gradually shorten. In addition, players who stepped into the green clouds would immediately produce the next Yogg-Saron Guardian. He did not know what would happen when a guardian like Tarim encountered the clouds. The answer would be revealed soon. Ha ha ha. Stupid guy, you're really only fit to be my slave. Along with Sarah's loud laughter, the 5 clouds that were originally only a meter in diameter expanded more than 10 times in an instant. From each cloud, a huge figure crawled out, and within a second, the body turned from a translucent illusory state to a solid state. They were 5 humanoid monsters that were at least 4 stories tall. They had purple skin and explosive muscles. Their bodies and lower limbs were still considered human. But their 2 arms were huge octopus tentacles. And their heads were unmistakably octopus heads. Even their chins were a few small tentacles that were constantly twisting. Duque's eyes narrowed into slits. Others might not know, but Duque knew very well that these were all commander-level monsters modeled after the Herald Wolaz, who guarded the ancient kingdom of Ankak. Originally, Sarah could only summon deformed monsters like the Guardians, but because of Tarim's stupid teammate, he directly summoned a boss. Tarim, don't touch those clouds. Also, you deal with the monsters that you created yourself. Duque yelled. Based on the principle of cleaning up one's own mess. Duque was absolutely unwilling to let the Alliance's powerhouses take action. But, before Duque's voice trailed off, something happened. Tarim had even lost his hammer. His eyes were red, and he covered his temples with both hands. The veins on his neck and face were bulging, and he looked like he was in pain. Ah, no. You can't deceive me, Sif is dead. Duque's face darkened. Seeing this scene, of course, he knew that Tarim was under a mental attack. Yogg-Saron began to invade Tarim's mental world through illusions. A 10-story tall giant, not to mention going crazy, even a fart could shake the earth. Duque and the other little ones could only roll as far as possible to avoid being affected by Tarim, who was rolling on the ground. Freya's expression turned ugly. We're in big trouble. Yogg-Saron is familiar with our mental world. If we get too close, there's a higher chance that we'll be re-brainwashed and then controlled. It'll be faster than before. On the other side, Mimiran's huge robot had already popped out 2 palms as grappling claws, grabbed Tarim's shoulder, and dragged him towards the entrance of the hall. Freya summoned a cauldron the size of half a football field. Oh, it was a large well of wisdom. She tried her best to resist Yogg-Saron's mental invasion of Tarim. Tarim's veins had subsided quite a bit. As for his combat power, it seemed that he couldn't count on him too much. Tarim, you. Duque wanted to curse and give the word trash to this deceptive guardian. In the end, he could only sigh. Tarim, you're such a disgrace. Leave the group. Chapter 1629. Come to think of it, Tarim was not to be blamed. Yogg-Saron was not imprisoned in Otter for a day and a half, but for 25,000 years. There was no such thing as an absolutely perfect prison in the world. No matter how tightly sealed the cage was, there would always be a time when it was damaged and revealed a gap. As the saying goes, guard day and night, it is hard to guard against a thief in the family. After Loken was controlled and completely brainwashed to become a loyal servant of Yogg-Saron, the personalities and past history of the Guardians were no longer a secret. Personality determined fate. For an evil god who was good at mind control, mastering these was equivalent to mastering the key to controlling the Guardians. Without the help of outsiders like Duke, even the 4 Guardians, Tarim, Hodier, Freya, and Mimiran, would have been completely brainwashed after being controlled by Yogg-Saron for a year and a half. In the end, they would have been beaten to death like how they dealt with Loken. Although the 4 Guardians were now awake, if they could be controlled once, they could be controlled a second time. With Yogg-Saron's familiarity, the second fall would be faster and deeper. Perhaps the second time would not be a simple beating that could wake them up. Sigh, Duque let out a long sigh, and his expression immediately changed to one of awe. Let's go. Behind Duque, a slim woman in red suddenly began to transform under Sala's gaze. In the short span of 2 breaths, he had transformed from a tiny human into a massive black dragon. Before the black dragon came over, she took a deep breath. There were so many fire elements in her lungs that even through the thick scales, muscles, and bones on her chest, one could clearly see the yellow radiance blooming inside. Deep breath. Blazing flames spewed out from her mouth and nose, looking like a sea of flames. Even the bravest faceless under Yogg-Saron did not dare to take such a terrifying heat head-on. Only the 3 faceless leaders were really unjustly attacked, and most of them chose to dodge. However, even with their arms covering their heads and half-squatting to eat, the 3 did not die on the spot. Their arms were charred, sticky, and even their flesh had melted together. However, they did not seem to feel pain. When the power of deep breath weakened, they tore their own flesh and rushed towards Onyxia. However, no one noticed that unknowingly, no less than 8 faceless bosses had been separated by Onyxia's big move. Black Dragon Princess was not the slightest bit afraid of the faceless leader monsters. She let out a loud roar and twisted her body. Her 10-meter-long meteor hammer-shaped tail with a terrifying spike at the end swept across. Immediately, it displayed the momentum of sweeping away 1,000 troops. At least 4 faceless ones' leaders were affected. The first one didn't suffer a direct hit, but the third one was hit by the dragon's tail. His right chest and abdomen immediately became a bloody mess. Just because the first one didn't receive a direct hit didn't mean that it was fine. It was also swept away like a bowling ball. It was only at this moment that everyone was shocked to discover that the 4 fellows who had been swept had actually separated into 4 directions and thrown themselves out of the battle circle, rolling in front of the 4 great guardians. Holy shit! Amazing! Don't even think about slacking off today. Gavin Rad smirked. At this time, everyone finally saw it. Onyxia, this seemingly fierce but actually a bit cowardly so-called guardian dragon, simply did not have the mind to fight with her life on the line. Her fighting style had always been from the heart. Well, all in all, it was cowardly. But she had thick skin and thick flesh. If she wasn't at the front, would it be Kalia holding a hammer and leading the charge? Therefore, with a big move, she directly scattered the opposite side, and then sat in a row to divide the fruits. Each guardian Audur got a leader-level faceless one. Her subtext was clearly, "Didn't you say you can't get close to Yogg-Saron? Can't you just deal with its little brothers? Come, one each, don't even think about taking a break." Freya was the first one to see through this trick. Being accused of slacking off in public was a disgrace for a guardian. The female giant's face was filled with shame and anger, but she couldn't do anything. The female giant fiercely stomped her foot, and the faceless one leader in front of her immediately trembled. The earth attribute attack of Tremor of Earth made the faceless one unable to stand steadily. "Come out, my ally!" Along with Freya's shout, 2 huge ancient trees lifted the solid bricks from the cracks in the floor tiles of the temple, stretched out their thick and powerful branches, and fiercely tied them up. Filthy creatures hiding in the depths of the earth. "Now, I will grant you the trial of light," Freya followed up with, "sunlight." The high temperature and heat of the resplendent sun was the most terrifying killing move for the faceless ones. A series of moves overflowing with murderous aura directly turned the faceless one's leader into a half-cripple. The guardian of the cold winter temple, Hodir, looked cold on the outside, but his heart was fiery. He first used freeze to send out a cold breath to lock the struggling faceless one leader, and then used rapid freeze to trap half of the opponent's body in ice. Facing an opponent who stretched out his head like a mole but couldn't shrink back, he laughed and raised his huge hammer. The hammer's black hammerhead was a bit like a large square wine cup, which constantly overflowed with an extremely cold breath. On the outside of the hammerhead were 4 sharp ice thorns. When Hodier's ultimate skill, Freezing Bash, smashed down, a miraculous scene unfolded. The Faceless One Leader's head exploded like a rotten watermelon. All the flesh and blood splashed in all directions, but before they could fall to the ground, they were completely frozen in mid-air. As if showing off, Hodier deliberately left the powerful Faceless One's body behind. Instead of completely destroying it, he threw it behind him. Perhaps, he wanted to leave it for later to slowly watch. Torim's thunder was the most violent and the simplest. It was an extremely exaggerated thunder that blasted an area the size of a basketball court into coke. As for the Faceless One Leader in the middle? He. What was that black thing? Think about it yourself. Among the 4 guardians, Mimiron was the most powerful. He first used his insanely ugly robot to fire a plasma cannon, killing the Faceless One Leader in front of him. Almost at the same time, P3WX2 laser barrage poured out. This extremely gorgeous laser beam was not something a mortal body could resist. Under this unreasonable laser barrage, the enemies in 2 basketball courts were swept clean. The 3 Faceless Ones leaders were first pierced by several extremely exaggerated laser beams. Then, the dozens of laser gun heads on the robot's arms turned, and the dense laser beams easily cut each leader's body into dozens of pieces of charred meat of different sizes. Chapter 1630. The 7 faceless leaders were killed almost at the same time. When they died, they were quite heroic, their entire bodies exploding in a very small area. Not only did flesh and blood splatter everywhere, but it also set off a strong shadow energy storm. It was a good thing that the Guardians were so powerful. However, Duque couldn't help but curse in his heart. Damn it! What the hell are you doing? Isn't this a trap? When Duke saw the mocking curve of Sarah's mouth that threatened to rise, he was angry. Yes, these faceless leaders looked very powerful, and the shadow energy fluctuations on their bodies were also amazing. If it was a 5-person elite team of professionals, it would take a lot of effort to deal with any one of them. But don't be mistaken, these guys were just cannon fodder. There were as many cannon fodder as one wanted to buy time. As long as enough time was bought, Yogg-Saron could come to the modern world in its complete form. Only a rich and overbearing veteran evil god like Yogg-Saron, who had as many underlings as dogs, could use a monster leader as cannon fodder. However, Duque was anxious and couldn't say it in advance. The Guardians were not so easy to fool. Duque could previously say that when he peeped into the River of Time, he also peeped into the future, but he was not Nozdormu, and there was no taboo that he couldn't spoil. If Duque spoiled it, it would be hard to explain later. It was fine now that everyone was united. After the fight was over, they would not settle accounts, but it would not be good to have a grudge between Duque and the Guardians. Originally, after Sarah showed her hand, Duque would immediately analyze it. Who knew that the Guardians would be so fierce that they directly killed 7? Awesome. Unfortunately, it was too awesome. Seeing that Sarah didn't say a word and directly summoned 8 faceless leaders in the green cloud, almost everyone, including the 4 Guardians, froze for a moment. Only Duque was clear-headed. He slammed Atish, and the Guardian's divine artifact staff suddenly swayed on the ground with a circle of blue ripples. Duque shouted, "Don't make a mistake. Your enemy is not Yogg-Saron's minions, but its incarnation. Those guys have a lot of space beacons on them, let them die next to Sarah." Explode his mother. We can't let Yogg-Saron come out in a complete state. You're very good. Sala, who had her secret exposed, was naturally furious. Her long hair began to flutter even though there was no wind. Her dark brown hair formed a terrifying mouth full of fangs in the air, as if it was about to swallow someone whole. Sarah waved her arms, and a mass of pitch-black shadow energy was thrown out. Shadow energy gave the impression of coldness. However, the energy that Sarah threw out was mixed with a sense of blazing anger. The constantly tumbling black energy was thrown into the air, directly divided into 9, and shot toward the 9 faceless leaders like electric bolts. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the bodies of the 9 leaders, which were already not small in size to begin with, became bigger on the spot. Their height had increased by 1 meter, but the greatest increase was still in their tentacle arms. If they were octopus-like tentacles before, they were now like the arms of a qilin. From a whip to a hammer, the increase in physical attack power was simply terrifying. Several paladins who were originally going to be the MT jumped in fright. Seeing the qilin arm smashing down, the paladins all hurriedly dodged. Only Magni was the most miserable. After using Avatar to become bigger, his agility also decreased greatly. He couldn't dodge at all. He used his shield to block the punch, and his arm almost broke. What the hell? Shorty King cursed. The enemy's attack suddenly increased. Duque naturally knew what was going on. This was Wrath of Sala, directly giving his own people chicken blood. Although the side effect was quite big, it didn't matter if they were cannon fodder. Fortunately, Wrath of Sala didn't increase the life force of the faceless leaders. However, this was also very troublesome. Right now, Duque really wanted Magni to level up. Because among the group of demigods in the Alliance, there wasn't a single F*King melee fighter. It wasn't that he couldn't let Sword Emperor in, but now wasn't the time, and Sword Emperor wasn't an MT. Duque's face darkened, and he shouted, "Hodier! Cooperate with me." Duque, who rolled up his sleeves and entered the arena, was naturally very strong. Originally, it was very difficult for Duque to link with Winter Guardian Hodier just by using Azeroth's ice elemental magic. Don't forget that a while ago, the big mouse Duque had been entrusted by Alexstrasza to help Calegos preserve the magic titan runes that originally belonged to Maligos. In an instant, the ice titan runes that represented the most primitive of the world began to dance around the two guardians, Duque and Hodier. The titan energy that represented the most primitive of the world's laws only lasted for 1/10 of a second before it surged. Even though it wasn't specifically targeted at the Alliance powerhouses, the absolute zero level of freezing air that spread throughout the hall was still a little unbearable for the Alliance powerhouses. "Come closer to me." The former elf Prince Kale, that's shouted, and then he released 5 spinning golden flames around him. The seemingly small flames kept circling 10 meters away from Kale, that's, drawing out a heart-like area that was enough to resist the cold outside. Onyxia also knew that Duque was taking care of the Alliance powerhouses. Her dragon eyes blinked, and in the end, her whole dragon lay down, blocking the shock wave of the cold for the mortals. "Ha!" Duque shouted, and suddenly stretched out his right hand. Absolute zero freeze break. An illusory iceberg suddenly appeared in the east, south, west, and north directions. The 4 icebergs collapsed at the same time, setting off a terrifying wave of ice that reached the top of the temple. It was an iceberg formed by the convergence of countless ice elements. It was crushed into powder, instantly frozen, exploded again, and frozen again. This ultimate move that combined physical and elemental double damage suddenly forced the remaining faceless leaders into a dead end. There was no room for resistance. Under the surging impact of the ice wave, they directly collided with each other and were all forced to Sala's side in a messy posture. Sala didn't exist in the present world of Azeroth. The ice wave easily passed through her body and couldn't cause any harm to her. However, the 9 faceless leaders piled up around her, looking extremely strange. What made her even more ashen was that Duque had obviously found her Achilles heel. Right. As long as these guys died beside Sala, when they self-destructed, Sala's avatar would also be destroyed, and then Yogg-Saron would be forced out in advance. Smash him to death. My hammer. Tarim's hand flashed with lightning as he once again hoarded the power of lightning on his warhammer. Not only him, but the other guardians, Queen Sylvanas, Vashj, and other powerhouses also exerted their strength. No, seeing that things were not going well, Sala let out a mournful scream. Chapter 1631. In fact, the Faceless Leader also has the ability to make people mentally retarded. However, if they were to be brainwashed so early on, then when Yogg-Saron's main body came out, there would be no need to fight anymore. Under the powerful pressure of the ancient god, they would just leave the group to preserve their intelligence. Duque made his move in advance because he considered this point. He directly used the ice wave to gather the leader of the Faceless Ones. In terms of attack output, Duque had never been inferior to anyone, but those 4 silly guardians could not get close, which was a bit of a pain in the ass. Duque did not want a group of onlookers who only knew how to shout 666. Therefore, the damage output was left to Tarim and the others. Save your energy, Duque instructed in his own magic circuit. Within a unit area, there was a limit to the number of elements that could be sent from the elemental realm. If the elemental channel was expanded without a limit, it would cause the space in the current world to become unstable. The power of lightning had high attack power, and its instantaneous damage was far above that of fire elemental magic. Unfortunately, even an idiot would know that fire magic was famous for consuming large amounts of mana. Naturally, lightning magic, which had explosive power, was even more ridiculous. 3 hours of charging, 3 seconds of acting tough. Fortunately, Tarim and the rest did not simply use the elements of the elemental world. They used the power that was converted from the Titan series energy of the arcane element. In addition, this was considered half their home field, so the elemental imbalance in the hall was not caused. The scene was still very magnificent. Tarim's lightning, Freya's sunlight, Hodier's ice, and Mimiran's laser. The 4 colors of light mixed together and formed a terrifying destructive energy ball. If he were to unleash these ultimate moves elsewhere, there would probably be a mushroom cloud on the spot. Then, passers-by would drink their tea and say, "Today is another day of nuclear annihilation." However, the scene became strange. Not to mention the stones flying in all directions. There was no explosion. There was no sound. There wasn't even any light. A black hole invisible to the naked eye seemed to have appeared where Sala was, absorbing all the destructive energy. Every expert could clearly see Sala's twisted face. At the same time, her limbs were twisting unnaturally. A pair of thick and bulging muscles on her bare arms were twisted into a twisted dough twist. It was a shocking sight. It wasn't an action that a normal human or Vrykul could do. However, Sala's eyes spewed out crimson flames, which then turned into balls of thick liquid. In the next second, the so-called slurry turned into some kind of seemingly holy energy. Suddenly, a pair of bright wings burst through the leather clothes on Sala's back and spread out with a whoosh. Sarah had become the battle angel Vrykul. Duque had seen this scene countless times in the game. He didn't think there was any problem before, but now that he was in the world of Azeroth, Duque couldn't help but wonder, damn it, what does the Vrykul have to do with Yogg-Saron? Perhaps the incarnation of Yogg-Saron had already begun to sneak out of Oder 10,000 years ago and spread the seeds of nightmares everywhere. Thinking about the ancient war 10,000 years ago, it was also a group of a few ancient gods who should have been suppressed who caused trouble. Enzos was involved, but Yogg-Saron might have also used mind control or inducement to secretly add fuel to the fire. That was why the High Elves courted death. After thinking about this, Duque didn't find it strange at all. The translucent battle angel hovered above the hall. The Guardians only needed a glance to know that this incarnation had yet to enter the world of Azeroth. She was still an illusory projection. As the battle angel Vrykul waved her arms, the floor in the center of the hall finally reacted. Disperse. There was no need for Duque to shout. Seeing this, the experienced Alliance heroes had already dispersed in advance. Suddenly, all the experts felt an inexplicable fear in their hearts. No one could look away. Everyone's line of sight had been firmly locked by the rapidly distorting space in front of them. The air in the hall was completely still. Whether it was the dust from the battle just now or the smell of blood that should have spread, everything was locked in place. A terrifying radiance surged out from the ground below the battle angel Vrykul, hovering in midair. The existence known as evil was gushing out from there. It was silent, quiet, and terrifying. All the living beings in the hall, whether they were non-living beings or not, seemed to have received the greatest degree of shock and were silent. Everything seemed to kneel down respectfully because of the horror of the one who was about to come out. A ball of constantly changing radiance from blue to green, and then back to blue, actually strongly repelling any power that belonged to the Titans. In the hall, the pillars engraved with Titan runes were dim. These pillars were once equivalent to the chains on the ancient god Yogg-Saron's cage. Now, there was no longer a trace of energy fluctuation on them. Sala, who had transformed into the battle angel, suddenly opened her eyes. There was chaos in her pupils. Suddenly, Sarah began to laugh maniacally. Ha ha ha. Wahahaha, accompanied by the ear-piercing and rough sound, all the experts felt that the laws of this place were deviating. The power of order was leaving them in fear, and the irregular energy of chaos was gushing out. It was like a power that mortals could never resist. It was eroding the entire space, as if it wanted to swallow this hall, this otter, and even the entire world into its mouth. Ka-la-la. The mortal heroes subconsciously lowered their heads and found that the gorgeous tiles under their feet had silently cracked with Sala as the center. The floor tiles that were originally part of the cage started to spin strangely, as if they were trembling in fear. They swayed and floated up into the air. In the next moment, the air in the entire hall was filled with an evil that everyone was familiar with. Then, everyone felt that they were being stared at by countless eyes. Slowly, their gazes were filled with greed, tyranny, anger, cruelty, and other negative things. This was not an illusion. Those deformed eyeballs that gradually turned from illusory to real in midair were indeed staring at everyone. And they were also staring at Duque. Whether it was Duque or the Guardians, no matter who it was, being stared at by hundreds and thousands of eyeballs was a normal reaction. All the experts felt a chill in their hearts. Immediately, a huge existence began to turn from illusory to real in the center of the hall. A loud voice echoed in the hall and even in order. It was the angry roar of the ancient god, the angry roar of the thousand-throated demon. I am a lucid dream. The monster in your nightmares. The demon with 1,000 faces. Foolish mortals and guardians, tremble in my true form. Surrender before the god of death. Chapter 1632. As a mutant super boss, Yogg-Saron was very ugly. Affecting the city's appearance and scaring children was used to describe a guy like it. In other words, all the ancient evil gods were guys who let down the audience. Previously in the game, Duque felt that Thun, Yogg-Saron, and so on were all very ugly. Now that he had encountered it in real life, he realized that Daddy Blizzard's artists had really used Photoshop. The beauty camera and a series of evil spells did not completely show Yogg-Saron's ugliness. Its ugliness was comparable to the Cthulhu evil god. The first impression that Yogg-Saron gave Duque was that it had a big mouth, a super big mouth that was 1,000,000 times more ferocious than a piranha. If it was a human, then its mouth would definitely be the kind that split to the back of the head. The incomparably huge mouth was full of crisscrossing fangs and thin teeth. The longest tooth was 3 stories high, and it would take at least 2 people to wrap their arms around the root of the tooth. Above the big mouth was a toad-like skull. 5 senses, okay, this thing was not just 5 senses, it should be 1,000 senses. The top of the skull was densely packed with eyes that seemed to be randomly distributed. In fact, they were not eyes. They were small mouths full of fangs. The reason why it seemed to be an illusion of eyes was purely because everyone saw the evil light emitting from the 1,000 throats. When everyone saw it clearly, the ladies were the first to break down. Korea, Gianna, Elusia, and the other queens all looked like they were about to vomit. Even though Duque had secretly prepared them in advance, even though they had all seen Thun's face before, they were still quite disgusted. If they were swallowed by that horrifying big mouth, there would be no bones left. If they were bitten by that small mouth, they would probably not be spared. This kind of horror at such close proximity was not something that could be endured by those who had great courage. Fortunately, one look at its translucent head and they knew that it was unknown whether the Titan's cage was still in effect or for some other reason, but Yogg-Saron did not seem to have truly descended into the modern world. Be careful! Tarim suddenly shouted. A huge tentacle appeared. Rather than saying that it broke through the ground, it was more accurate to say that it broke through space. Even though Duque had given the order early in the morning, because the enemy's situation was unclear, the Alliance's heroes were spread out to avoid being wiped out all at once. However, this tentacle still managed to trap a certain someone. Ah, help, the tail is going to break. It broke, yes, it was his hoof that got hit. As soon as the gigantic tentacle appeared, it curled towards the hoof. However, Imriel's reaction was not slow. He raised his shield and sidestepped the attack. Who knew that even though she was fast, the tentacles would react even faster? As soon as they rushed forward, they whipped back. They couldn't hit the hoof's legs, but they managed to pull the hoof's tail. He was then pulled into the air like a flag being waved by a flag bearer, swaying back and forth in the air. Holy shield! Ah! It's not working. The hoof tried to activate his invincibility, but it was unknown whether he was distracted or brainwashed, but he failed to activate his invincibility. Duque bared his teeth and looked at the hoof that was being swung around. Although he wanted to say that the magical girl and tentacles were a perfect match, and the magic hoof was not bad either, Duque still shouted, Coriolan. At first, Duque did not intend to let the 4 guardians of Alcafon's treasury attack. Although the hall on the Stairway of Madness was not small, the space was still limited. If 8 10-story tall giants were all squeezed together, the Alliance's heroes would not even need to fight. Just avoiding them would be difficult. Compared to Alcafon and the others, Tarim and the other guardians of the same size were stronger. However, Tarim and the others' brainwaves had all been successfully decrypted, and rushing forward would be suicide. With no other choice, Duque still used Alcafon and the others as meat shields for the time being. As soon as Flame Guardian Coriolan heard Duque's call, he smashed over with a bursting fireball, directly turning this 3-story tall, writhing tentacle into a torch. Storm Guardian Amalan was the second to arrive. Being in charge of the wind element, he had speed that the other giant guardians did not have. Watching a 10-story giant turn into a gust of wind and rush over in an instant, using his palm as a knife to chop off the tentacle with one hand, the shock was indescribable. The hoof was saved. She covered her tail with tears in the corner of her eyes. It was said that a kitten hanging upside down with its tail would easily poop. He did not know if Delaney's hoof would have this reaction when her tail was pulled too hard. Duque did not have time to care about this. Because Yogg-Saron's vicious move was coming again. Dozens of giant tentacles rose from the illusion. They did not actively attack any of the Alliance's powerhouses, but their auxiliary attacks were more disgusting than direct attacks. Black Plague. The plague came to its victims without a sound or warning. Take Gavin Rad for example. Right now, this guy felt that he was better off dead than alive. His entire life was gloomy. That terrible feeling was like being infected with syphilis or AIDS, plus his penis was rotting and shortening by 1 centimeter every day. What was even more disgusting was that his whole body was emitting a glow like that of a dog, causing the people around him to stay away from him. I need treatment. Gavin Rad said bitterly. Normal dispelling spells could not save him. Only someone at the level of a bishop could help him. Gavin Rad, don't move. Kalia was rarely domineering. She cast holy light magic. In the air in front of her, a perspective image of Gavin Rad's body appeared. It looked more like an X-ray picture, but it was more detailed. If Duque saw this, he would definitely shout for an ultrasound. Unfortunately, Duque did not have time, because he was retarded. When a blue hat was placed on Duque's head, Duque knew that something was wrong. Brain connection, this is a trick of Yogg-Saron, who is good at mind control. This trick can connect the brains of two people who are far away and last for 30 seconds. When the two people are more than 20 yards away from each other, both of them will continuously lose life and consciousness. Approaching each other can prevent this effect. However, no one had ever told Duque that connecting to the brain could allow him to peek at the other person's thoughts. In less than half a second, Duque suddenly realized that he could sense the hoof's thoughts. It's over. It's over. I've actually connected to Duke Marcus's brain. Will he punish me? Spank me? Won't let go of my tail? Sob, I keep feeling like he has ulterior motives toward my tail. Duque really wanted to bang his head against the wall and die. Damn, what's wrong with this hoof's brain? Duque's own thoughts were not too worried about being peeped at, because long before he entered the stairway of madness, Duque had already asked the system elf to open the shallow layer of the mental world's defense system. Even if they peeped, they would only be able to see what Duque had set up beforehand. What was playing in his first layer of mental defense? It seemed to be Brainless Sheep and Grey Lady? Chapter 1633. Beautiful, happy, la la la, Imriel was on the verge of breaking down. She could clearly sense Duque's thoughts. Although the thoughts in Duque's mind were a mess, she was sure that it was Duque's. She was confused and did not know what to do. Her brain was hurting. She did not know if she was losing her moral integrity or her intelligence. Perhaps it was both. She stared blankly at Duque, who was 30 meters away. Duque's mouth was wide open as if he was shouting something at her. She subconsciously smiled at Duque, a silly smile. Seeing the hoof's typical silly smile, Duque clenched his teeth and rolled his eyes. He did not know where to start. Ouch! Ouch! A piercing pain in his soul made Duque suck in a breath of cold air. He noticed that this was a very rare form of injury. First of all, his mind thought that he was injured. Then, there seemed to be a wound on his arm out of nowhere, and dark red blood spurted out just like that. Pust! How long had it been since he was injured? Even his demigod body was not immune to this strange injury. Duque had no choice but to flash in front of the hoof. At first, Duque thought that the distance was enough to negate the effect of brain connection. Who knew, it was still not enough. F***ck. How close did it have to be? The injury happened every second. Duque did not want to go through that again. After all, it was not just an injury, but also a loss of mind. Duque did not know if a person with a high IQ or a strong will could last longer. He did not want to gamble. He grabbed the horn on the hoof's right head and pressed his forehead against the hoof's forehead. Buzz! This was not a normal sound. It was more like a voice of the soul. It shocked Duque and Imriel. Duque could clearly feel that part of his memory that did not belong to the mental barrier had been sent to the hoof during the spiritual collision. A portion of the hoof's memories also intruded into Duque's spirit sea. Duque quickly glanced at it. It was a memory fragment of Hoof finding joy in the midst of suffering under the protection of the Drenii. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time to look at it in detail. He had the system elf seal it up temporarily. Duque immediately shouted, warning the others, "Be careful." Yogg-Saron would release a brainwave that would connect the two victims. If the two of them were too far away from each other, they would lose consciousness and life force at the same time. Once their consciousness falls beyond the limit, they will be controlled by the Yogg-Saron. Nothing is more convincing than the victim's story. Duque, who had personally experienced its effects, was able to name the skills in the game. It was more like an ability that surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. At this moment, the scene was very chaotic. The corrosive tentacles that drilled out from the ground frantically poured out messy things in all directions. There was the Doomsday Curse, that would cause serious shadow damage. There was the Cold Heart, that would greatly reduce a person's movement and attack speed. There was also the Battle Angel Sala, who was guiding 4 terrifying laser beams to randomly shoot at the crowd. However, the laser beams did not move very fast. As long as one was not entangled by the tentacles, there was a high chance of escaping. No one wanted to try the laser beams that could kill someone instantly. It was in this chaotic scene that Duque did not notice the strange blush on Imriel's face after she absorbed part of his memory. Duque did not know what went wrong. The Yogg-Saron at this time was obviously more powerful than he thought. In addition to the huge number of tentacles, Sala, who was hovering in the air, in the middle of the spatial crack, could actually continue to summon the faceless leader. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. These huge deformed monsters with ugly tentacles as arms pounced on the 4 guardians almost as soon as they came out of the green mist. Although they were not as tall as Alcaphon, they were not much weaker in terms of strength. What was more difficult to deal with was their mind control, special skill. If one saw these huge fellows suddenly stop moving and stare at an alliance expert, then the people nearby would have to be careful. This was a standard shadow spell, and people with low shadow resistance were often more susceptible to it. For example, Vanessa, she was hit and almost chopped off Gavin Rad's little penis. However, Gavin Rad was very skilled. Before Vanessa could make a move, he first gave the female thief a sanction, using the power of the holy light to knock her out and restore her consciousness. However, Vanessa was the only one who knew how much her sanity had dropped under the mind control. Those who were hit were everywhere, and the scene became more and more chaotic. "Those who were hit, come over here," Duque shouted. This was because the Guardian of Life, Freya, had opened another well of wisdom. This was the only way to eliminate the negative effects of monkey-style reduce intelligence. Duque. This can't go on. There's no end to those octopuses. Magni shouted. He was using the Balrog's hammer to teach a thick tentacle that was swaying left and right. The blazing flames ignited the entire tentacle, and it gave off a smell similar to roasted squid, but 100 times more burnt. Everyone realized that there were too many tentacles and too many faceless leaders. Whether it was Sala or Yogg-Saron's projection, they were all illusory existences caught in the cracks of space and could not be touched at all. When the hammer fell, it was as if it was hitting the air, and Yogg-Saron was unharmed. "We have to do something," Tyrion also shouted. Ashbringer was powerful, and a full force slash could cut off several tentacles. However, within a few seconds, the same number of tentacles would replace it. This gave people a feeling of despair, as if all their attacks were useless. Just wait. There will be a chance. Yogg-Saron can't endlessly send tentacles through the cracks in space without revealing a flaw. Duque said with absolute certainty. In fact, even if Duque was not a transmigrator, with his current eyesight, he could see that Yogg-Saron's flaw was gradually getting bigger. From a spatial point of view, Yogg-Saron's current method was indeed very cunning. Every spatial passage could not be one way. There must be an entrance. What Yogg-Saron needed to do now was to immediately destroy the small space channel after sending his biological tissues or subordinates of Faceless One. This method could make it impossible for the enemy to bite back at its main body. There were pros and cons. In a short period of time, the effect was significant. The Allied forces could not fight back, and could only blindly use elemental energy. However, whether Yogg-Saron noticed or not, the surrounding space was already a little unstable. Chapter 1634. The instability of the space did not mean that Otter's space was about to collapse. As a powerful cage used to imprison an ancient god, the toughness of the space here was beyond Duque's imagination. Here, even if Duque had a tiche, he would not be able to open half a portal. The difficulty was so high that it was like giving Duque an iron spoon and asking him to dig through a 1,000-meter thick steel plate. In addition to the sturdy space, there were also various sealing systems for divine senses and thoughts. Even though this place was riddled with holes because of Yogg-Saron, it was not difficult to see how sturdy the defense here was 25,000 years ago. If it were Duque, he would have given up on healing and become a prisoner obediently, letting all his spirit be worn away. Duque found it hard to imagine how Yogg-Saron could dig a secret passage under such circumstances, transmit its will, and then secretly corrode the King of Wisdom, Loken. In fact, even though Yogg-Saron had taken care of almost all the guardians here, it still could not come out easily. No. According to the latest detection data from the system ELF, Yogg-Saron had already come out. However, in order to avoid direct attacks on its body, which was still in a weakened state, it should be hiding in the spatial crevice between the cage and the real world to catch its breath. There was no need for Duque to do so. Mimiron saw through this first, and he immediately shouted, "Damn it! Yogg-Saron is stalling for time." The more time it fought for, the more its strength would recover as time went by. We must break this spatial wall as soon as possible and attack its body. How do we break it? How? Tarim, who had the most irritable temper, retorted. Mimiron was an inventor and half a scientist, but it was the first time he had encountered such a strange situation. Now, the spiritual energy that leaked out from the spatial crevice should be Yogg-Saron's weakness. How could they make use of these spiritual energy balls? It was Duque who told the truth. I know. These spiritual energy balls are the intersection between the spatial crevice and the real world, the spatial nodes. We only need to remove the concealment to find the coordinates of the spatial rift where Yogg-Saron is located. After saying that, Duque used his drumstick, a tiche, as a spear and brandished it. There was an element of coolness in this, but more importantly, when Duque waved, a tiche, he made the artifact staff come into contact with the surrounding space, creating a better connection effect. Slamming the bottom of the staff onto the cracked floor, Duque shouted, "Remove it." Falsehood. The arcane circuits in his body rotated at high speed, and the surging arcane energy poured into the staff through the circuit ports on his arm. It was a spell that was the complete opposite of a mage's mirror clone. Duque tried to get rid of the false mirror image that shrouded the energy clumps. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Wow! The difference in energy levels between a demigod and a true god was so exaggerated that it was like a natural chasm. It almost shocked Duque to death. Duque spat out a mouthful of blood. F***ck. What a loss. Duque could clearly feel the backlash of the magic impact on his magic circuit. Duque? Kalia exclaimed and directly gave Duque a greater healing. Jaina even flashed over, trying to help Duque with her circuit and restore peace to Duque's magic circuit. No. It's okay. Duque gently pushed Jaina away. When it came to magic, Duque was second to none in the coalition army. He couldn't do it, and the others couldn't do it either. Duque immediately changed his mind. Damn it, if you don't dispel it, then I'll add something to it, okay? Something that made Sala seethe with anger happened. Duque directly used True Mirror to create a few fake portals on top of the spiritual energy balls of Yogg-Saron. Duque pointed at the several illusory portals. Charge. 1 door for each person. Touch the door, and you can connect your mind to it. That's Yogg-Saron's dream. Only by destroying the nightmarish creatures in the dream can you break through the fog of spiritual energy and reveal the spatial coordinates. Finally, drag Yogg-Saron out of the spatial rift and kill him. Originally, Duque should have taken the lead and led the way to break through the spiritual energy balls that would mutate into dreams. Duque hesitated. In this life, because of his many good deeds, many key major events had already gone awry. In the original history, Yogg-Saron would give out 3 dreams, which corresponded to 3 major historical events in Azeroth: Storm Fortress Dream, Grandmaster Assassin Garona. She was once Ghoul Dan's assistant. Later, she was sent to Karazhan and had a passionate time with Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras. Later, she was deeply trusted by King Lang and became the most important orc advisor to the king and Anduin Lothar. Unexpectedly, under Ghoul Dan's control, she eventually betrayed King Lang and assassinated King Lang in front of the young Varian. This also led to the collapse of Stormwind in the first battle of the Dark Portal in history. Obsidian Sanctum Dream: when forging the Dragon Soul, the fallen Deathwing deceived the other brothers and forged the Demon Soul, and then almost wiped out Maligo's Blue Dragon Legion. Frozen Crown Dream: betrayed by the alchemists in the Gates of Heaven's Wrath, Bolvar was poisoned and burned by the Red Dragon's flames. His soul was resurrected by Arthas. Arthas tortured Bolvar while trying to convert him. These dreams given by Yogg-Saron actually had a strong psychological effect. The 3 dreams seemed to be unrelated, but in fact, they all had the same core idea: betrayal. Garona betrayed Lang and Anduin's trust and killed Lang. Nethario betrayed his brothers and sisters and became famous as the Deathwing. There was also Bolvar. This was the future version of betrayal. At that time, it also hinted that Bolvar would betray the Alliance and become a powerful Death Knight. The problem was, if Yogg-Saron gave these 3 dreams again in this life, Duque would not believe any of them except for the second one. Because Garona did not succeed in assassinating Lang, Lang lived until the end of World War II. Then, Duque stirred up trouble and directly prevented the Gates of Heaven's Wrath incident from happening. Therefore, if there were still 3 dreams, Duque had no idea what the other 2 dreams would be. The unknown sometimes represented fear. Duque had never been a particularly determined person. He wasn't in the past, and he was average now. He probably wouldn't be strong in the future. If it weren't for the moral integrity of the Saints to protect Duque, Duque would have long since joined the Scourge Legion or the Burning Legion. Just as Duque stood still, his companions and the harem all thought that Duque was going to stay so that he could open the portal as soon as the dream was broken. Chapter 1635. Am I scared? Duque looked at his empty right hand. When he didn't use Song of Light and Shadow, Duque always left his right hand empty. Ever since he arrived in Azeroth more than 20 years ago, that hand hadn't changed much. Maybe it was just a little bit bigger. He went from an ignorant wizard apprentice to a demigod step by step. His experience was enough to write a novel of more than 3 million words. At this moment, fierce battles were still going on around him, but in Duque's vision, everything was still hazy no matter how he looked around. There were only moving shadows. Duque knew that it was an illusion, but he couldn't help but call out, "Aurelia." Yes. Aurelia was the most special person for Duque. This sexy, elegant, and noble elf was an epic of Azeroth. For some reason, Duque felt lost. He called out Aurelia's name, hoping to see the elf stay by his side as usual. But the surroundings were still hazy. The people around him all had lively faces and rich expressions, but in Duque's mind, their faces were all marked as blank. Windlesha? Duke stretched out his right hand in vain to grab it, but he caught nothing. The beautiful figure of the female elf in front of him was just an illusion. In his vision, the scenery changed. Duque suddenly found himself in the infinite void of space. The planet Azeroth below him was equally hazy and moving away at a high speed. Then, he felt that his body was being pulled into a 1,000-meter-long rope. Was he being dragged into a black hole? Or was he teleported? He was constantly being dragged into the deepest part of the universe, and he felt like he was falling. The illusion of weightlessness caused Duke to feel panic that he had not felt in a long time. This feeling made him feel like he was suffocating, and even the last drop of air in his lungs was being squeezed out of his throat. Ah! Duque woke up abruptly. He opened his eyes and saw his right hand reaching out randomly. His angry palm was still in a groping position. Obviously, it was destined to touch nothing. Duque could clearly feel Sala's gaze. Yogg-Saron was already staring at him. Perhaps, as the commander of the Alliance and the leader of the Allied forces, he was the favorite prey of the ancient gods. A chill came over him. It was as if he had been tied up and placed in front of 1,000 mouths full of fangs. He had an ominous premonition that he would be thrown into the mouths at any time and die without a burial. For a moment, Duque thought of giving up. I don't have to enter those dreams. It's more beneficial for the Alliance army if I'm overseeing the situation from the outside. Even if I don't do anything now, this powerful team will still win. Duque's own voice resounded in his spirit one after another. There were piles and piles of high-sounding excuses. Duque almost convinced himself. At this moment, Duque saw a beautiful and valiant female figure leading the charge. Duque, I'll go first. Sylvanas, the second sister of the Windrunner family who was still slightly immature, had now carried the banner of the elves. Now that she was the queen of the Blood Elves, she had obviously thrown away all her confusion. Duque noticed that the moment she came into contact with the spiritual energy mass, the mist of the dream suddenly cleared up. That was, the day of the betrayal of the Sun King Anastrian. Yes. That's right. For the High Elves of this generation, this was the deepest pain in the hearts of all the elves. Their king had betrayed their own people. Could Sylvanas deal with the nightmares inside? The question had only just arisen in Duque's mind, but it was immediately dispelled by Duque. A voice in his heart clearly told him, if it was Queen Sylvanas, there would definitely be no problem. Another person entered the dream. She didn't do it of her own accord. It was more like she was forcefully pulled in by a ball of nightmare energy. Onyxia. Duque saw with his own eyes that it was Yogg-Saron who threw a ball of nightmare energy onto her dragon tail. Almost at the instant she touched the dream substance, Onyxia uncontrollably turned into a human form and was pulled into the dream. The third to enter was Tyrion. The fourth was Vashj. Duque didn't know if there was some kind of inevitability here, or if there was some kind of special direction. He only knew that Yogg-Saron didn't want to talk to him, and threw a ball of dream energy at him. At this moment, Duque had the chance to dodge. He gave up and dodged. Because other than this stage, there was still a third stage. Duque couldn't imagine that if he retreated here, he would be targeted by Yogg-Saron in the third stage and be attacked by mental control skills. Commander Magni. Before entering the dream, Duque made this decision. All right. Magni clenched his teeth. The light in front of him grew brighter, and that blurry mirage swallowed Duque whole. Duque disappeared from the real world, and entered the dream within the space-time gap. A red sun was falling obliquely on the Isle of Quel Danas in the west. The afterglow of the setting sun was like an eternal golden light above the sun-well, dyeing half of the sky into a golden-red haze. Under this twilight, a team of rangers rode chocobos, escorting a convoy of trucks along the coastline towards the revived Silvery Moon City. Sylvanas rode her chocobo at the front of the team, advancing along the crescent-shaped beach that had been washed out by the seawater. Her shadow was dragged out by the setting sun, forming a slightly hunched silhouette on the sandy and slippery beach. Sylvanas raised her head to look at Silvery Moon City in the distance. This majestic city that had been revived once again was her greatest pride. For it to prosper, she had put in 5,000 years of effort. In this city by the sea, there were countless magic towers that towered into the clouds. They were neatly arranged, pointing to the sky and the vast universe. A series of chocobo claws scratched the ground behind her. Sylvanas suddenly turned back, and her aged silhouette was reflected in the shiny armor of the arcane puppet beside her. Ah! So I'm already very old. Yes, 5,000 years had passed since the Sun King Anastrian had betrayed the elves. When the elves returned to a peaceful life, their worship of magic rose once more. The representatives were the wizards, led by Kale, That's, who had raised their heads once more. Your Majesty, Kale, That's has raised the flag of rebellion. He and the new Silvery Moon Council have rebelled. Hadgeron Brightwing, who had hurried over, was also old and clumsy. The half of his body that had been burned by the fire was a ghastly sight. Chapter 1636. Impossible. He's older than me. How could he? No. He's defected to the Calamity Army. Death has given him eternal life. He's even more powerful than he was at his peak. In the magic mirror that Hadgeron opened was Kale, That's. His face was bloodless, and there were only 2 balls of blue soul fire in his eye sockets. With a wave of his hand, he killed hundreds and thousands of elven rangers in a sea of fire. No, it shouldn't be like this. 5,000 years of hard work had been destroyed in an instant. The feeling of his lifetime's hard work being destroyed in a moment pressed down on him like an avalanche, causing Sylvanas to be unable to catch his breath. She still held the Solidar Stars of Fury, and she still had a large group of subordinates under her. But the old age of her body had eroded her courage and corroded her heart. A voice kept echoing in her ears. It was a voice that she would always remember. The owner of the voice was called Anastrian Sunstrider. She had snatched this kingdom from the hands of the Sunstrider royal family, who had betrayed the High Elves. Do you feel it? Sylvanas. Do you feel how I felt back then? All my hard work has gone down the drain. All my future has been forcibly taken away. There's nothing left except this feeling of old age and powerlessness. A sense of weakness came. It was as if all the blood in her body had been sucked out. Sylvanas felt as if she had done this hundreds of millions of times, to the point where she was already so familiar with drawing a bow that she couldn't even do it anymore. That kind of trembling feeling of age was quickly corroding her heart. No. This isn't me. It's not me. Sylvanas realized that she was about to cry. That feeling of powerlessness was the most terrifying torture for someone like her, who was always determined to forge ahead. She could face the most terrifying enemy without fear, but she could not face her old self. She could ignore her old appearance, but she could not face herself who could not even draw a bow. She trembled. Anastrian's voice was magnetic and hallucinatory. Do you understand how I feel? Betrayal is not because of self-interest. I did it to better lead the elves, for the elves to have a better future. At this moment, Sylvanas was at a complete loss. At the same time, in different dreams, every intruder was being interrogated by their conscience, justice, and beliefs. In the dream of the obsidian temple, Onyxia had returned to the past, and she had become an unremarkable young dragon. Her father was right in front of her, tearing her mother into pieces. Then, a fingertip of a huge claw pressed fiercely against Onyxia's back, forcing her to raise her neck and look up at the horrifying scene that was so huge that it occupied her entire field of vision. The huge dragon's nose continuously breathed out flames. The acid that had accumulated on the chest of the wings of death dripped down the gaps of the metal armor, converging into a small stream, and was approaching the young and helpless girl step by step. Shivering, she could only lower her head and listen to her father's lecture. It was a voice that shocked the entire sanctum and even the entire world. Idiot! This was not betrayal. This is just us black dragons breaking free from the cage those filthy titans gave us. Guardian dragons. Bullshit. This damned responsibility has shackled our freedom. Whatever we want to do, we must first obtain the permission of responsibility. This is not some guardian dragon at all, we are just slaves that the titans use to watch the door. The Yogg-Saron gods are the original masters of this world. They were the greatest of the native gods. The titans and whatnot, they are just a bunch of despicable intruders. Look at you, Onyxia. You are a disgrace to us, the great black dragons. There is nothing to be ashamed of being the servant of the greatest ancient god, but to become the mount of insignificant humans. Has your pride been eaten by slime? 3,000 years ago, those humans were just jungle monkeys wearing animal skins. Onyxia only felt that her body seemed to become smaller and smaller, while in her eyes, her father's body grew larger and larger. He used his black wings to cover the entire sky. On the other side, Vashti was dreaming of 10,000 years ago, the time when she was the maid of Queen Azhara. Vashti, do you know your sins? It was a voice that sounded like thunder. The perfect queen, with a perfect face, had spoken words that represented judgment. Almost subconsciously, Vashti wanted to kneel down. And, in the palace of Lordaeron, Tyrion saw the past as a bystander, watching how Tyrinas treated Arthas coldly. There was no kinship, no forgiveness. There was only one seemingly unattainable goal after another. No matter how hard one worked, there was no reward for completing the goal, because it was natural. If one did not achieve the goal, there would only be angry punishment. All that was on the tip of his tongue was responsibility. A kind heart, in fact, had already gradually become twisted. In different dreamlands, each challenger had a different experience. As for Duque, as soon as he stepped into the dream, he knew that Yogg-Saron had put in a lot of effort this time. Because, he suddenly saw himself in an internet cafe. Every night, in the deepest part of his mind, he would always recall that memory, more than 10 acquaintances, and brothers and sisters from all over the country, forming a 40-man party. In the voice chat group, they shouted at the top of their lungs, giving commands, screaming in pain when the party was wiped out, and the ecstasy of finally defeating the boss after so many hardships. He still remembered the first time they formed a party to fight the Molten Core. They actually died in front of the 2 Molten Core giants at the entrance for the whole night. He still remembered the first time they fought the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They were stuck for 2 whole weeks. Almost every night was 8 hours of high-intensity exploration. The moment the boss fell, the whole internet cafe boiled, as if the cold tap water had instantly boiled to 100 degrees. Ha ha ha. Past. Finally killed this boss. Duque shouted wildly, raising his hands high. But in the midst of joy, he suddenly had a question. Where's my Aurelia? Where's my harem? Did you become stupid from playing games? Ah Guang laughed and scolded. We're playing games. Duque's smile suddenly turned bitter, because he saw that in his retina, the label for Ah Guang was clearly, Yogg-Saron's tentacle. Duque suddenly sighed. No wonder Yogg-Saron is the evil god that's best at currying favor. If it weren't for the system elf, I would probably really think that what happened to me in Azeroth was a long-ago dream. When I really believed that it was a dream, I would naturally betray all of Azeroth. Unfortunately, I can't go back. I, Duque, am already a demigod in Azeroth. With a slightly gloomy smile, Duque snapped his fingers. Almost instantly, all the friends sitting next to Duque in the internet cafe were lit up like human torches. Chapter 1637. Among his former friends, there were his roommates, classmates from the same class and the class next door, as well as people who often came to the internet cafe and were familiar with each other. They watched as the illusions in their appearances were burned. Duque only had one feeling. That's heart-wrenching, buddy. Duque was so upset that he was about to cry. However, this was a mental attack. It was a mental attack where only one of them could become the victor. Usually, it was difficult for any intelligent creature with a normal mind to control their mind. There were only two ways to control a creature with high intelligence and combat power in the shortest amount of time with the simplest violence: severely injure its mind and wear down its intelligence. The mind-weakening spell was easy to understand. It would be considered a success if a person with an average IQ of 90 dropped to an IQ of 5. Whether it was by slowing down their thinking or weakening their thinking. However, such a method would often reduce the creature's combat ability. Without the ability to think, humans were no different from mentally retarded zombies. Yogg-Saron chose another, more troublesome method: severely injuring the mind. This wasn't untraceable. Before Duque entered Order, he carefully recalled Yogg-Saron's methods. He came to the conclusion that Yogg-Saron was a super expert at dissociative amnesia. Dissociative amnesia was a memory disorder characterized by sudden memory regression. The disease was caused by great pressure or trauma, such as witnessing the death of a loved one. The patient forgot the painful experience, as if the memory had never happened, living in a self-deceiving lie. Take Tarim for example. In the battle with Loken in history, Tarim carried great hatred and heavy responsibilities, but he was brainwashed into a slave by Yogg-Saron the moment he turned around. This was what he relied on. The mental world was the most complicated thing. If it was completely brainwashed, one would become an idiot. Yogg-Saron's method was to retain a considerable degree of the victim's cognition, leaving behind his most cherished memories, and then modify other aspects. After a period of time, slowly modifying his cognition and memories perfectly, he would become a brainless fan like Loken. Duke had racked his brains to see if there was a weakness in his heart that could cause him to suffer a serious mental injury. He summed it up for a long time and finally came to a conclusion: he was worried about gains and losses. With his current achievements and the perfect and harmonious harem, he could not bear to give it up. If there was anything he feared the most, it would be losing everything he had in Azeroth. Therefore, after Yogg-Saron expended a Herculean effort and used an undetectable method to bypass the protection of the system elf and peek into Duque's memories, it was easy to imagine what kind of attack he would launch. Duque had set a trap for himself. If he recalled his memories of the Celestial Empire on Earth, then he would automatically activate the system elf's prompt. This move saved Duque. Ha ha ha. Ah Guang turned into a flaming skeleton in the fire. Duque calmly turned around. If he were to face this crazy skeleton, he would lose his sanity every second. He really wanted to light a cigarette, but unfortunately, Duque did not smoke. After some thought, a crystal glass made of frost elements appeared in Duque's hand. It was filled with psychedelic and colorful liquid arcane energy. Since it's a dream and I can't even open my storage space, then this is it. With a strange expression that was hard to tell whether it was a smile or a bitter one, Duque raised the glass in his hand high, and then let the arcane liquid drip onto the ground. The world of Warcraft used to be so beautiful. For it, some people climbed over the wall to go to the internet cafe in the middle of the night. For it, some people wrote novels for 2 hours every day and then worked in the World of Warcraft for 12 hours every day. For it, some people woke up in the dark to turn on the computer during the night shift in the factory at 3 in the morning just because Duque, the guild president of the guild, called them. Hello. XX, I'm online for a fight. Everyone had fun, played, celebrated, and been heartbroken inside. It had been more than 20 years since he entered the world of Azeroth, and that memory was already very distant. It was the end of an era. But for the traveler Duque, it was also the beginning of an era. Looking at the arcane liquor sprinkling in the air, Duque murmured to himself, to salute our lost youth. Right. Duque would miss it, but he would not be infatuated with it. From the first day he came to this world, he had been engaged in a battle that even he thought he could not win, let alone the world. Facing powerful enemies that were as numerous as the stars in the sky, he had hesitated, doubted, and even almost retreated. But since he had never given up on the simple dream of a better life, the only thing he could do was win the final victory and create a legend that belonged only to me, Duque. Following Duke's murmurs, the dream in front of him seemed to respond to his words. The wall of the internet cafe disappeared without a sound. It revealed an enormous white jellyfish-like object floating in midair. That thing overlapped with the thing in Duque's memory. That's right, it was Yogg-Saron's brain, in charge of dreams. In a sense, it was also one of Isera's most powerful enemies. When Duque was the first to step into the Temple of the Mind, he was a little surprised. Almost at the same time, the other walls of the Temple of the Mind also disappeared within a few seconds, revealing the existence behind the walls. The first to come out was Sylvanas. As the Blood Elf Queen, she was graceful. Facing Duque's questioning gaze, she proudly raised her chin. An Astrian's nightmare seems to want to use age to prove that its powerlessness and betrayal were not a mistake. Humph. I'm not afraid of old age. Even if I'm so old that I can't even pull a bowstring, I will still use my body to protect my people, even if I die on the charge. Duque was a little speechless, but then he felt relieved. Never bow to fate. Sure enough, this is the Sylvanas Windrunner I love. Theon was the second to appear. He shook his head. I met Arthas. In that dream, he seemed to want to justify his act of patricide. Unfortunately, I didn't listen. I've seen the kindest orcs, and the dirtiest humans. Justice cannot be desecrated, and justice cannot be trampled on. Justice does not distinguish between races or borders. The nightmare has its principles, and I have my justice. As one of the 5 silver saints, Theon's belief was probably second only to Uther. As for him, Duque had nothing to worry about. Vashj appeared in the form of a human-faced Naga. She smiled bitterly. I met Queen Azhara, and she seemed to want to be my master. But 10,000 years is too long. I only have hatred for her. Also, the light of redemption in my heart woke me up. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.